Amen.
Okay. Pastor, sharing, I
Yes.
can share.
Yeah, you can share. Yesterday we started Unit 5 with the senior cohort. So you all are very, very close to the catching up with them.
Okay. The article that I was supposed to take is The Form of Church by Snyder. Uh, so Snyder is basically talking about what should be a structure in the church, how it should be, whether it is necessary. Did the Bible say or the New Testament church say that there should be a form and structure, etc. Okay, so uh, somehow, I mean, I didn't find this article very, like the previous articles, I really enjoyed reading. This I didn't find, I didn't enjoy, I didn't, just as personal listening. Because, he goes on to take references of some other Ajhar, I mean, 3, 4 authors. Then he tells what they are saying and all of that to just kind of tell us, he's making it that is a structure necessary and how it should be kind. Okay, so just like Jean gets when we read, he says that wherever there is any kind of life, there's going to be some function, something is going to be happening. And wherever something is happening, there's going to be a form. And where there is a form means it will lead to some kind of a structure. So he tells us that whether it is a spiritual growth or a human or a botanical, this is bound to happen. That structure is inevitable. And Snyder is just trying to make one thing very clear to us, that as structure is inevitable, but church structures are not all equally valid. There can be structures, but how it comes through, not all structures are really needed. And when I read this, I was thinking, yeah, maybe if you take mainline churches, some of the structures are so rigid that you wonder, is it really necessary? I think in the new churches, in the younger churches, at least that structure is fluid. It is not very rigid, and then it makes it easier for functioning, for growth, and all of that. Then yeah. Then Snyder very nicely, he gives us an example of, he tells us that the wineskin is actually our structures. Okay, this is one example, and I found it interesting. It is very long, but I just picked up what I personally found interesting and what I thought we can share and understand from the entire article. He says that the wineskin is like a structure, while it is the church is the wine that is inside. And like we all know, a wine skin, it's made of skin of a goat or something like that, of goat, and then it goes through various lot of wear and tear. Similarly, a structure, it will go through wear and tear. If the structure is fine and good, then the church is good. Doesn't mean like that, it's the other way around. The church has to be a good kind of it is the wine that is important more than the wine skin. And he then tells us, okay, I will give you a workable structure, something that Snyder put across. He says, you want to have a workable structure in a church, keep these few things in mind. And first thing he keeps emphasizing throughout the article is this: church structure must be biblically valid. Now, again, when we talk about biblical validity, if you see, he goes on in his article to say, if you take New Testament churches, nobody gave us any kind of structure or any kind of form saying that, okay, this is how it has to be followed. But, he gives us a lot of references. And then I was just going through the other letters that he writes. Definitely, wherever Paul went, churches were established. But again, he was not there every time around. If you just read his letters, you will see, as he addresses in Titus to Titus as my dear son. Then you know Timothy, how long he was with him. Then in other places, like I think Colossians, Ephesians, he says to all the elders and deacons in the church. So definitely there was some kind of a structure that came along as churches were established and all of that. Again, it was very fluid. It is as in different places churches were established, this happened. So first thing he says is always keep in mind that it has to be biblically valid. Next thing he says is it must be culturally viable, he says. And when he talks about cultural viability, he says that biblical validity takes precedence over cultural viability. We cannot say that because a culture in a particular place is like that, we will carry it on the way we want it. He says that there will always be a tension along with the surrounding culture when we start off with something in terms of structure or how we want to go about things. And he says, but we must take pains to make sure that this tension comes from the antithesis between light and darkness, not from the incompatibility of cultural forms. Now, from what I understood of this, or what I kind of gauge from this, is if we see our mainline churches, many of the structures in our churches are based on, say, how synagogues functioned, or we still continue with, or the way Catholics have their churches in terms of bishops and priests and deacons, and how a diocese needs to function and all of that. Another thing that culturally I would say is the way maybe how we conduct our services, maybe especially again in the mainline churches, that it has to be the head of the church that has to come first, and he has to do certain things, or how the importance we give per priest, which is normally seen maybe in cultures like the Hindus and all this. If you see, they give a lot of importance to the priest, and he's kept at a pedestal, or certain things. So this is what I felt when he's talking about cultural viability, that make sure that is again based on the Bible. And there has to be flexibility in our structures that we form. That is, it should be easy to hand over to someone else once the person is trained. Once the person, it is not like, once I hold a position or something, then I'm not going to leave it. So based on all this, Snyder, he picks up from the early church. He says, okay, keep these few things in mind. Again, he's not saying that this is something fixed or anything. Snyder just picks out some points from the Old Testament, and he says the structure of the early church was based on these few things. He says there was worship always. So the first Christians did not neglect this. They came together. There was corporate worship, all of that. And he said that the structure of a church was always a community. It was not that like one single person taking control or anything of that sort. There was fellowship. They cared for one another. They were there for one another. Third, he says, it's leadership. Now, how did this leadership come? Definitely, it began with just the 12 apostles. And again, like I said, it was fluid. As things changed, as Stephen's persecution happened, and as the believers went to different places, what happened there as they shared the gospel, as people met together, then you see how things happen. And also we see, the classic example that almost all writers mention is the Antioch church, how leaders and believers came together. The church is established, then the Jewish church, or the first church, sends Barnabas to check on them, and then from there, how leadership is established there, or how you have the believers over there in the Antioch church praying and sending forth Paul, and then how Paul went to Rome and how he started things there. So you see leadership which was natural, which was elected carefully and then sent. And of course, nurturing, which we very clearly see all through the New Testament, what Paul did, he was just nurturing churches through his letters, whether he was in prison, whatever happened, he addressed issues, he spoke them, encouraged them. This was something that we saw all through the churches. Then, of course, witnessing. It was not just the apostles who witnessed initially because they were with Jesus, but it continues as a body of believers. You see that they took it upon themselves, that we need to, wherever it included, not just caring for people, but also proclamation. So Snyder picks up these four, five things from the early church. Then he starts mentioning a few authors. So he says that there is no formalized structure detectable when you read the Bible, and none is prescribed. Then, just again, he says that the first apostles as leaders, and then new leaders were taught and trained, no formal teaching. And another thing he says, we don't see anywhere in the Acts formally ordained clergy or any formal constitution or book of discipline presented. There's nothing of that sort being told. Of course, in Acts, we do read that some of the Jewish priests believed and came to faith, but nothing else. He says that there's no documentation or anything saying that all these priests, Jewish priests who became believers, then were, became priests in that body of believers or anything of that sort. And then he says that when we say patterns in the life of early church and which we can call as structure, he mentions three things. He says three things that stands out is charismatic leadership, large group worship, and small group fellowship. So he says these three things are very clearly seen. We definitely had a bigger group of believers, and also there was a smaller group which were more missional. They had a clear kind of a demarcation on what each of them did, maybe, and of course the leaders. And he puts forth like this. He says that today each local Christian community is free to develop its own leadership patterns, provided these patterns are sensitive to and in harmony with the basic biblical provision of leadership to spiritual gifts. Then he brings about one more point is about spiritual gifts. Like you cannot take a young new believer and maybe one day when the main pastor is not there, just tell him, hey, you are, because maybe he's an IT guy, speaks well, etc., etc., just pick on him and say, hey, today, next Sunday you give the message. It doesn't just work like that. What do you say, his good point or what he's good at maybe in the administration side or doing something else. So he says that we have to make sure that it is based on spiritual gift, and for that he also says leadership is important, where they recognize the spiritual gifts of people and then they are trained, mentored to go about. Then it also says that to a large extent, it was simply the natural way to do things. Maybe they met outdoors, home, lecture halls, no specific structures on how they met, where they met, what they did, nothing is put forth, he says. And then he starts speaking or gives reference about one author, Donald Bloish, and he says, Bloish says that while all Christians are called to holiness or sainthood, still not all Christians are called to sainthood in the same way. That's what he says. He says we are all called to be saints, but not maybe at the same level. And Bloish, keeping all this in mind, he says there is two types of discipleship, and these two types of discipleship will lead to a structure. And what he says, again, he bases this two types of discipleship again on few points that he picks out. He says this small group, even in a church, it should be genuinely evangelical, committed to the gospel, drawing its principles from the Bible. And he says it should be small scale model of the large church itself, thus visibly demonstrating the reality of Christian community. Then he also puts, Bloish says that it should be an agent of reconciliation between churches, being in the proper sense Catholic as well as evangelical. So what Bloish says is, even if it is a smaller groups, even if it is a larger groups, these are things that you must keep in mind when you have structures formed. And he says it should be outreaching with an evangelistic missionary fervor. It will be in conflict. He says that it will be in conflict with the principal values and spirit of surrounding culture, thus demonstrating the line between the church and the world. So then he says it should be an eschatological sign of coming kingdom of God. That is, they must be told about the coming of God, the death on the cross, and God by radical witness, the lordship of Christ. So he says that even in a bigger church, or as the kind of discipleship we do, it has to be based on all this. And definitely then there will be a structure formed. It should give time to study, instruction, as well as prayer and proclamation. Then, so Bloish puts forth saying that there's a place for smaller, more intimate fellowship within the larger community of the church, keeping in mind all these points. So that Snyder brings forth this author and tells that, see, Snyder says, I mean, Bloch says that there has to be kinds of discipleship, one on like the larger community, and then the smaller, wherever we find that people are good at something, we put them together, but they don't become separate entities. They are still in connection with the core of the church, and that's how they function. And so there's a place in a church for smaller intimate fellowship within the larger community. So Snyder mentions him. Then he mentions another author, Ralph D. Winter. And Ralph D. Winter, he looks at structure from the perspective of spreading the gospel, planting churches around the world. His thoughts are also parallel to what Blois says. He says in a church, more inclusive and general structures where families and believing communities are there, that we see that we train them, we teach them, we worship together in the larger community. But also as leaders, as ministers, we, based on spiritual gifting, we must see that there can also be a smaller, more restricted and potentially mission-oriented group of people. And he puts forth points here. He says that the important points are that these structures, again, he comes back to saying this consist of people committed to each other and to a particular mission. It can be worship, it can be service, it can be whatever it is. And he says that see themselves not as the church, but as an order or missionary structure within the church, with which they remain in fellowship and communication. Then he says, since it was composed of smaller group of adults, again, this he's coming to the smaller group. He says, since it is a smaller group of adults committed to the same mission, it has the freedom and flexibility to carry out its mission much more effectively than a larger community acting as a whole could do. Say, supposing we take the technical team, they exactly know what can be the glitches, what other than maybe some auntie who has no knowledge of technology and things coming and giving her ideas and saying no, things should be done like this. So I think even within the church, when we form structures, we have to be clear what people are good at, and also commitment, and thus it becomes easy for smaller groups to work flexibly. That's what what I understood from what he's saying. And yeah, then some things, again, some pointers that he put. What is the positives of mission group or smaller group? He says that not all Christians are called to the same specific task, nor do they all have the same spiritual gifting. And he quotes here Romans, saying that having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let us use them. So we cannot say in a church that everybody has to be speakers, everybody has to lead the worship, everyone has to go out and become missionaries. Maybe not all have that potential to go out there and missionary, but in our own capacity, we still continue to be missionaries. Now, that is what he puts, through all this, and that we have to work in a constant relationship, whether we take parachurches and all of that, but church is the crux. We begin from there. We cannot say because we are serving in a hospital or because we are doing something in Sunday school, that is our mission. Our mission is in the church. That is when new believers come. Are we ready to encourage them, teach them, and all of that, and also encourage them to go out? So the second thing he says is it is more effective and less frustrating that a small group involved with specific mission than to attempt to get a large number of people stirred up and committed to that task. Okay. Third point he puts is this arrangement also recognizes that mission is best carried out in the context of community. The lone entrepreneur and the rugged individualist do not exemplify the proper model of Christian service. And we see it even throughout the way Paul and all of them work. You see when when Barnabas was sent and he saw the community of believers there, he knew, the Spirit led him to go back to get Paul. knowing that maybe that it is not enough to just him alone encouraging and teaching and involved in the esther, he goes and he gets Paul. Again, when Paul is sent, we don't see anywhere that people are going alone. There is always someone, there is always a group of people getting involved in any kind of Christian service and what they were doing. Then Snyder says the church must be a reconciling fellowship which cuts across barriers of sex, social status, age, racial, which mainline churches are still fighting. We don't have ladies maybe doing major things in the church, or they don't ordain priests to our women, and so many things that are still, we are far, far away, especially mainline churches, of course. In the other no denominational or just churches that are just groups of people, they don't look at all these things. We encourage instead, whether it is women or younger youth or whomever, to take up what they feel they are good at. And therefore, again, Snyder puts forth that structure can be more fluid in the way we look at it and how we carry out our missions. Then he also puts another point: each group is to carry out its specific mission, not in total isolation or independence from other group. And so he says that all mission groups, however, must be tied into the body. Again, coming back to the church. Okay, and yeah, then he says we have to maintain a balance in this. He says structuring of the church locally or on the basis of discerned past discovered spiritual gift is one way to make a church organic in nature. Otherwise, we just don't grow. We can become complacent in the way we run it and all that. So he says spiritual gifting and all that has to be taken into consideration to help a church grow. Then he says a believer either experience costly post koinonia. This I really liked. Yes, it is costly, I think, when we decide to serve in a church, serve people, because it is eating into our personal time or our other responsibilities or many other things. But we have to be ready if we want to serve God, if we want to be a part of the body. I think these are, so I like the way Snyder puts it. He says a believer either experiences costly close koinonia with brothers and sisters in Christ, or he or she has only the foggiest of notions as to what the church is. This is what most of our, at least I think I can talk about my parents and people, they had a vague idea. They believed that you need to go to church, you need to be a part of all that larger community. But I think they were really not clear of what otherwise the church was doing, where it was on the mission field or what was happening. So sometimes you feel, it is not my job. That is what Snyder mentions there. He says that sometimes, we give out things that people are doing, and then we come and go. We go to church and we come back. So we have the foggiest notion of what exactly a church should be. So we must try and avoid this imbalance. So then, of course, he puts forth this lovely diagram he puts for institutional structures and the church. And he says he writes a lot about church structures. And this is what he says. What again I picked up is para church structures are useful to the extent that they aid the church in its mission. But again, they are man-made and culturally determined. Whereas the church itself is part of the new wine of the gospel. All parachurch structures are wineskins, useful, at times indispensable, but also subject to wear and tear. And I remembered, because previously in one of the competencies I was going through missionaries and all this, and that time I just went through Graham Staines and what he was doing in Baharganj, in the place where he was, where he started the leprosy hospital and all. From 2016 or 14, the hospital that he started is closed. It's closed. The government and all, they have put a lot of allegations about not paying bills and something, whatever it is. And I was feeling so sad, when I was reading that, thinking all that man did, everything, because the hospital and all were basically funded by Australian people and his friends and all of that. And the government very happily have closed it. It's a nice building, at least on the article where, it's a proper good building. So sometimes when the parachurches start, At the same time, I believe if he was involved or he had some connection with the local church, if there was something happening along with the local church, the local church could have still taken it up. Of course, he had started it in a very small place, but at least if he was involved somewhere along with the church, I think we still would have had a hospital running with maybe doctors coming in and still treating the leper patients there and whatever it is. So I just remembered it because I just couldn't connect just reading through these articles, and that's what we see. One of the schools very well known here in Bangalore is the Clarence School. And if you see, Clarence is I have a lot of friends whose children go there. They still continue to tell every parent that we are based on the Bible. They continue to teach the children verses from the Bible. They continue to move in a very Christian way, in the way they take the school, which is not seen in most of the Christian, if you can call parachurch organizations like other hospitals or whatever. So this is again something that just came to my mind. And then in dealing with the whole question of church structure, then it is helpful to make a clear distinction between the church as a community of God's people and all the other parachurch structures, whether local church organizational forms, denominational structures, mission agencies, evangelistic organization, educational institutions, or ecclesiastical structures. So he is saying, understand, church is, spirit-led. Church is where everything has to start. And so in the structure, if you see, he says, church, the community of God's people. Then we can have whatever denominational structures, interdenominational, non-denominational. And from there, he has so many things that I don't even understand some of these boards and commissions, federations, associations. What he is trying to say is, don't make this your church. This is not the place where your spiritual growth happens. This is not the place. This is your place of service. And then from here, maybe you witness, what you are about. And then maybe from here, you reach out to the world. But this is not your place. This is your place. So you have to have your connector. You have to come back here. You have to get all your feeding from here. Your encouragement, and then when you're sent out also, that is where the relationship, that's what we see through all Paul's letters. Even when he was in the prison, he continued to minister, he continued to be in touch with that he had sent forth. And of course, I believe that even if, just taking again something that I could relate to, a Sunday school, teaching there, when you send out the children, it is not that the children continue to come back to the Sunday school, right? You place him into different churches, maybe wherever he goes as a a young adult or wherever. So again, what he learns here, he takes with him somewhere, maybe to his school or maybe to his workplace, and he also goes to another church, maybe, we don't know, but we cannot say that this is his place of growth. This is the place of growth. And of course the relationship continues. So talking about structure, again, what Snyder says is, remember, don't make this parachurches your main place. And therefore he says, thus the church is a spiritual reality which is always cross-culturally valid, but parachurch structures are not the essence of the church. So then he gives this whole column of differentiation. He says church is God's creation, parachurch is man's creation, which is obvious. We don't see any parachurches or any kind of things in the New Testament. If you take it like that, we don't see, that schools were set up or hospitals were set up, nothing, because I think in those times they didn't need. I mean, it is very, we're talking about two completely different times. But because he's saying it is the church, and it is from here that we grow and all that, and then we can be servants in these places, we can serve in these places and all that, but we come back here. Then of course church is spiritual fact, sociological fact, cross-cultural. Anywhere we go, I believe the praying, the worshiping, the breaking of bread, all that you see cross-culturally. If we go to a believing church, this, he says, is culturally bound. Again, this I didn't completely kind of understand why he calls para church structures culturally bound, but I believe maybe, based on where the place is, how a particular um, institution or how an organization works, maybe, I don't know. Then biblically understood and evaluated, which is sociologically understood and evaluated. Yeah, I think many a time in para church structures, if you see, I mean, again, this is from my experience of what I know. They have in some of these institutions and places, you have board members. Now, all the board members do many a time is when there's a problem, they may give some advice or from their experiences, because board members are also, again, connected somewhere. But that is not the place of his service. He's just there. I think all of them, their growth, their spiritual thing starts from the church, and how they serve and all that is, again, very, it is an individual's growth or what he does. And he's ultimately, the last thing that Snyder says is you're ultimately answerable to God in whatever structures and whatever forms you put in. And of course, a church is essential. This is expendable, eternal, temporary, like what I told you about the school or the hospitals. It is there for some time, sometimes it just doesn't work. Divine revelation, human tradition, purpose to glorify God, purpose to serve the church. That is what, to glorify God and to serve the church. So again, this we have to understand it. It is very deep in the sense that many may say, yeah, even if I'm a doctor, I'm glorifying God in that. Or if I'm a teacher, I'm glorifying God in that. So we have to really think through why it is different. And the biblical church is grounded in biblical revelation. Parachurch or infra-church structures are based on post-biblical church tradition, it says. Okay. And one important point that he again puts forth is the important thing for every form of ministry is that the biblical church be built and grow to maturity in Christ. That is, that local Christian communities or fellowships be multiplied, that such communities truly demonstrate the quality of life seen in Jesus Christ, and that the church live in this world as the redeemed people of God. Again, very deep words. I wonder how much of it we are able to do or exercise and show the world, whether redeemed people of God and, all of that. I mean, when you read these articles, again, he puts another very beautiful model again here. He says the same thing. It's all in parallel. He says again that we have the church, we have the large group, small group, leadership through gifting that we have, and we have all these other para-denominations. And if you see, he says that, yes, it is again a service to the church. All what we have, the missions, the hospital, schools, and then we just ministry, and this is a ministry to the world that we show to all these movements, whether it is your printing presses, your committees, your seminaries, all of that. Seminaries also, just because you go and study somewhere doesn't make you a missionary. It is again about going back and what you do into the community, into your church place. And yeah, I think, and from all that, Snyder says implication on cross-cultural witnessing. Again, cross-cultural witnessing is something that I didn't really kind of understand completely. I believe he's saying that wherever you go, these are the few things that we need to keep in mind. Basically, that is what cross-culture, where we, so I was thinking, see, all these writers and authors that we read are all foreign authors. If we have to cross-cultural in India itself, from one state to another, we will see cross-cultural witnessing. Sometimes it can be difficult. You take churches in Nagaland, churches somewhere in the south, in Tamil Nadu, and a small village, we will see great differences. And how the structures are there and how they function itself will be different. So he just puts again a few points to keep in mind and what it implies, when we are thinking about structures in these churches and what is this witnessing about. Again, what he emphasizes throughout, the church as biblically presented is always cross-culturally relevant as it proceeds from divine action and transcends any particular cultural form. And that's why Paul was able to get through maybe to other places, people, and all of that. and even into synagogues and tell them where they were wrong, because it was again a divine action. He was able to talk to, help them understand, and that's why people also agreed and believed, because they saw a difference. And then we see, and I think because of that, we also in wherever, when Saint Thomas came to India also, if he was able to bring something here and make a change, it was because of a divine action. And so it definitely, church as biblically presented, it goes across every culture. Then the basic structure of charismatic leadership, small group, large group, is again cross-culturally viable. Definitely. I mean, you go anywhere, we will have the main leaders, we will have the small deacons, we will have the smaller people down, and then we will have our the small mission group. So you go to any church, we will see that. Then parachurch structures are not necessarily cross-culturally valid, he says. Uh, Now, again, that is something that I really don't understand completely, but yes. So he does say that it is not viable throughout. I really didn't understand this part. Now, why he says that parachurches cannot be viable everywhere. Then next he says is the exercise of spiritual gifts will result in cross-cultural evangelism and witness. I agreed with him on this, because definitely, if you are led by the Spirit, if you are clear of what God's purpose of giving you certain talents were, then wherever you go, you will want to use it. You will be confident that God will use you. And I just like these lines. It is God who calls and who gives gifts, and the gift and the call go together. Your gift can't be one thing and you cannot be doing something else. Then you will never grow in the places God places us. Next, the church is itself a missionary community, and any group of missionaries may be legitimate embodiment of the church. Then he says parachurch missionary or evangelistic structure should be created wherever needed to get the job done. Sometimes, very enthusiastically, people will go in the same place. You will have 4 and 5 hospitals, but I mean, never seen, at least in India, wherever there was a need, definitely churches and schools schools and hospitals have been set up, is what at least I feel. Then while the church is God's agent of evangelism, dynamic parachurch structures can be man's agent of evangelism, useful in God's hand for more rapid and effective propagation of the gospel. That is what we see when missionaries came to India. They thought, first, let's serve the people of that community before we give them the gospel. So they started, and definitely they did make an impact. And today, of course, with our political conditions and all, things are changing, but definitely this did make an impact, is what I believe. That's why I didn't understand why parachurch structures cannot be cross-culturally valid. We had foreign missionaries who came and they made their colleges, their schools, and it's still working. But of course, people want non-Christians to be the principals today, and they want something else happening, seats for others. All that is happening today. Then we see they are man-made. Parachurches are culturally determined. All parachurch structures should be subjected to continuous, rigorous sociological and theological analysis to determine their effectiveness as instruments of the church. This all is like huge things. I wonder to what extent parachurches today, rigorous sociological, theological analysis is happening. And, it is, anyway, this is, it just keeps you thinking, when you read all this. Then finally, he says church structure is a question of the community of God's people using the given intelligence and creativity to manufacture useful tools to help extend the church's witness, while always remembering that these man-made tools stand under God's judgment and must never be worshipped. So I end here. This is the what I, yeah.
Let's put our hands together for Suma sister. And I definitely say that this article is, to me, these are very, I would say that this is in the mid-level. There are much more difficult articles, some of it which you can't even read and understand, because half of it is in real Greek, okay? So this is a core article in the sense, like our Paul's cycle, that particular Hesselgrave's article. This is a core article because he brings out some very, very important aspects that we probably need to put into our competencies when we design a model. So your competency number 4, we are doing competency number 4, and our competency number 5. We are doing competence number 4. Yes, networking, organizations, and the local church. If you can come to your unit 4 picture, if you can come to your unit 4, the main in your what I call as a mother deed, everything you come out of there. In that it says unit 4, the title is networking, organizations, and the local church. We should not go, the focus we tend to is go to the parachurch and other organizations, but the focus for the author or the one who is compiling this is Jeffrey, is still the local church. What he is trying to highlight is how the local church is still God's creation, and the other things are less important. We may be tempted to, without our knowledge, to go and think that Jeff Reed is more trying to teach us on parachurch organization. Jeff Reed is not interested in parachurch organization. Jeff Reed is interested in the church, but he's giving a comparison to this thing. So when you write your competency also, please don't major on parachurch organizations. Please major on church and contrast that with parachurch organization. That's what he's trying to do here. The other thing is, so issue number 1 is authority of a parachurch organization. The issue number 1. Issue number 2 is relationship of a local church to a parachurch organization. And so we have only 2 issues there. And what sister did was, from issue 2, the form of the church, Howard Snyder. Now we can open to a discussion because I think this article requires some amount of discussion. So sister missed one point under workable structures. Church structure must be temporally flexible. Church structure must be. So she spoke about church structure must be biblically valid. Very important. That means if you create a structure, it should have a biblical validity. That means it should arise out of a biblical idea, a biblical thought. Second is, a church structure must be culturally viable. You can't do something which may not be culturally, not appropriate, not culturally appropriate. You should, all your church structures must be culturally viable. And third is, church structure must be temporally flexible. I mean, these are direct implications for us as a pastors and leaders in a church, that inevitably church will have form. Inevitably, as church moves into a culture and as we profess our faith, practice our faith, we will have structures. Okay, so I'm now trying, we'll open the floor for discussion on any areas that you would like to comment and I'm having echo. Okay, Pastor Joseph, why is there echo from your? Do you have 2 speakers? Yeah, you have 2 of them on open. Yeah, okay. So let us open to discussion. There's a lot of interesting discussions that can happen in this context, what Howard Snyder has taken us through. Yes. Maybe you can share your learning. Maybe you can share, other than Suma sister, everybody else can share because Suma sister just did the presentation. Just to have a coffee, relax. Anybody else would like to comment on Snyder's?
So right now, while pandemic is going on, so earlier we used to meet physically and do fellowship, but now as that is not possible, so we are gathering virtually and doing virtual fellowship. So this is flexibility. And even Sunday school is the popular name given for that children's club what we usually take, but in some places it happens even on Saturday. And then again, if fellowship is to be done, like usually here in India, we keep a day as Sunday to do our fellowship. But then if I talk about Gulf countries like Dubai and all, where Sunday is not a holiday, where it's a holiday on Friday. So it's okay to meet on a Friday and we do fellowship.
Shruti is from the senior cohort. You can see the power of the senior cohort here. Brilliantly done. I mean, you are talking very clear structures that are can be temporarily flexible. But all of those what you said were amazing stuff. Okay, so yep. If we are so bent on service on Sundays, and if you consider any other day as not appropriate for Sunday service, then you have a problem because whereas in a church in Dubai gathers on, I grew up in Dubai, so we had Thursday evening worship. I was part of the Dubai Matama Church at that time before I was born again, and Sunday morning was Sunday school. I'm sorry, Saturday morning was Sunday school. So if we have to be flexible there. So all of those are forms, and how these forms are flexible to accommodate the local cultural settings. Any other thoughts? Good. So this is anything else you want to share? Any other thoughts you have, please?
Even leadership can be assigned like today only, and even sometimes if at all the main leader is going out for some important or emergency work has come up, so it is okay for others also to lead. It is okay for others also to lead, and similarly we don't have to follow a rigid what we say a step by step procedure. Okay, the earlier leader used to do first this, second this, third this. So means it can be changed a little bit, whichever is as per the biblical thoughts only. Like rather than always one person only singing, we can give chance to others also to sing. And similarly, every time there is in the church sermon happening, but one Sunday or one day of the week can be given for normal sharing also.
Okay. Also, one more thing. Let me just introduce Shruti. Shruti and her husband Elijah are probably the youngest pastors. They just took over the Whitefield Church. Now she is Pastor Amma, or Pastor, along with all of us. And she is one of the fastest in the senior cohort, and she's attending two cohorts: the morning and I mean the other cohort and this one. So she's probably past even writing this competency. So really happy that you could share. So all of those examples that she used are very interesting to see that forms are flexible in a time context. Forms of so I'm just reminded of, I think I've shared this before also, and I'm sorry if I'm bashing you again with this. Somewhere in September of 2019, I gave this. I went to Pastor Sam's room as usual. We meet regularly because I was typing for him his letters and helping him with his communication and things like that. And I went to him as usual, and I have the wildest and weirdest ideas, and he was the only person who could handle all these ideas. So I walked into his room and said, "Pastor, I've got this new revelation." So I call him uncle, of course. Uncle, I have this new revelation. He said, "Okay, come sit down." He wanted to immediately, douse the fire so that I will not create any harm. So he made me sit down in his cabin. And then he said, "Okay, tell me your revelation." I said, "Pastor, you pray over me and release me into the cyber world as a cyber mission." So the moment Pastor heard this, Pastor went, "This fellow is mad." So anyway, I presented to him a case, and I think he forwarded it to some of the senior leaders also. A letter which was from me, which basically told that I think there is a new geography that we are not able to see. And I think if we don't cover that geography, we will not cover the ends of the earth. So I presented the ends of the earth as the cyber world where people stay. Most of the young people are either on WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, which is a cyber world. It's not there in the physical world. So it's as good as if you go to the street and share a tract. You can be in a cyber street or a cyber world and give tracts and do things there. So I said, there is an opportunity. If we can do cyber evangelism, I think there's a possibility of a cyber church. And after hearing all this, he said, "Right now, you don't talk about this to anybody." Okay. He told me, yes, he took assurance from me that please don't share this with anybody. You please write everything and send it to me as a proposal. So I wrote everything as a proposal and sent it. And we got feedbacks. He shared with me the feedbacks of many of the leaders, and all of them, a majority of them went on to say that that's not possible. Church should be physical. Why? Communion can never be virtual. Okay, then there was a lot of this thing, and Pastor used all those feedbacks from senior leaders and bashed me nicely with it. And he enjoyed doing that one. Anyway, I miss him so badly. Okay, and I miss those meetings also. So I was maybe I was not put off because Uncle Lane always had a beautiful way of correcting or beautiful way of saying no. And I didn't take offense, but I decided I'm going for cyber church, and I decided to move in the as a cyber missionary and look at into reaching out into the cyber world. But I thought I respected Pastor Sam and said I will not affect the network in any way. So he always told me, George, you've got good ideas, but you must remember you are a network. Anything that you do can disturb the rest of the network. He had to call me many times in over the journey of church planting that we were doing and telling me that be careful of this practice, be careful of this form. He used to tell me it will disrupt the network. So 20, this is somewhere in September 2019. I think somewhere in October, November, the leaders would have got the letter. And the discussion he had with me somewhere in November, he was not well. In December 2019, he was not at all well. I had the opportunity to stay with him in the hospital, and we had good discussions in the hospital room when I was staying with him overnight. Then in 2020, I kept quiet. I continued, and then in 2020, pandemic came, and there's no way to do physical church, and nothing was happening, and everybody went into cyber church. So I went to Pastor Sam. That was, of course, he was well at that time. I went to him one day and said, "Uncle, do you think my proposal is still valid? Do you think there is option for cyber church?" He got very upset with me because everybody was doing cyber church, and all the allegations and the opposition that came in terms of saying that we can never have communion virtually. Now everybody was having communion virtually. We were having care cells virtually. Everything was virtual. So the idea was, the forms became very, very stiff for us, that we were not able to flex beyond what was norm at that time. And so what the author is trying to say is, all of our forms should be temporarily flexible. Of course, I mean, not everybody can, maybe work in that kind of a setting, and we all still prefer to go back to physical churches. Okay, that definitely is not a thing. But the idea was that we could temporarily flex to accommodate all of what church was happening, because when I studied theologically, everything that a church is can be done virtually. Everything that the churches can be done virtually. And so I proposed that way. So the idea of temporal flexibility is something that we need to constantly think about when we build churches, or when I say build churches, I'm talking about the organic form of the church. I'm not talking about the organization of the church. That when we build forms and patterns as we set it into culture, those patterns and forms should be having cultural viability, it should be biblically valid, and it should be temporally flexible. Very key for us to take home today is that as pastors and leaders, that we should be flexible always, as long as it doesn't go outside of the gambit of the scripture. But we should also see that many of these would be culturally viable. Some thoughts, any comments on this? And that would end up to the workable structures. Up till that, it will get over. Any thought on anything if you're keeping the book open?
Also, the structure typically here talks about, because the template is required. So there's a what that one needs to focus on: worship, community, witnessing, and nurturing the church. The how, of course, is based on what the need is, isn't it? Today is a pandemic, so you do it this way. It's a Friday is a holiday, so you worship on Friday. But then what needs to be sacrosanct, isn't it? That is a template which is given. So it is a form in a way which is not temporarily flexible. So there is witnessing, there is also development of leadership and nurturing and all that. That's number one. Number two is that one thing which I didn't see is the exposition of the word in the church. What I see today, at least the church which I've been through, is that the depth of the word, the exposition of the word is limited to sometimes Sunday worship or even Bible group studies, etc. The whole, the church is not really deeply involved in the understanding of the word, in the depth of the word. And there is no time sometimes in that. So the pulpit is probably used to give messages which are largely social, connected to the Bible. So one question, one point which I said is that there is a template, there is a form. The what is clear, but the how is absolutely flexible. But the what needs to be done, because I asked one priest, I remember I asked him, you have so much of a Marthoma priest who actually mentored me. I said, your liturgy which you have is so much templated, it is put in the form of a book. Why is it so rigid? Why somebody has to stand? Because I, as a non-Christian, went to a Marthoma church and I had to read the Manglish book. And sometimes during English worship, I used to use the English book. Then he told me a very profound thing. He said the early church, not early church, I mean saying for the fear of dilution of what people would do in the expansion, there could be dilution. So that this was what was required. A liturgy was required for worship, etc. And that's what he told me. So, this is my view about the form.
Yeah, Brother Najib, let me just explain that. I think what we are talking about, form and structure. So, for example, when you say worship is generic. It does not have any form. It is philosophical, and it can come into a form as we place it in the culture. Okay, so when we say now worship, let's say that one of my close friends they were a missionary group called Frontiers, and there's a global group, and their only one team was focused on reaching out to Maldivian Muslims. Okay, and they worked maybe several decades to reach out to this group, the Maldivian Muslims, who cannot see anything because they are unidentified anything outside the world of Maldives. And Brother Najib knows because he's working currently there. And the whole idea of Divehi as a language, and which has got several dialects, which got a religious dialect, a common man's dialect, and you can't even translate the Bible. So they ended up first translating the Bible into Divehi, into the sacred dialect, and they tried to give the book out, and they just didn't strike because the common man could figure it out. So and when they had worked about 10-15 years, and they got 8 believers. Can you believe it? After 10-15 years of work, they got 8 believers. And I was there in that room when they were deciding, now that we got 8 believers, let's start a church. And their issue was, how do we teach them? What do we teach them about how to worship Jesus? And they were struggling whether we take them to the Western view, idea of worship, or shall we place it in their own culture and in their own way of worship, but they worship Jesus Christ. And it was a brilliant discussion. I mean, at that time, I was very young and I didn't think about all those things. But today, so you can have a form of the philosophical idea of worship. So the form itself can be temporal, but the core element of it will not be flexible. That's not, we cannot take away the concept of worship. Worship is always there, part of it.
So in that particular situation, the Muslims bow down, they get up, they bow down. Those actions are okay till the time they are worshipping Jesus. Is that what you're saying?
So what they were working with, I'm not saying that there was, they were saying.
I'm just asking because, I could still be saying Jesus and, bowing down.
Exactly. So what they are saying is, in their worldview and culture, all that they ever knew about worship was, they would sit down, look to the left, look to the right, and all that, this thing. And let us allow them to continue to worship like that. But they're worshiping Jesus in their setting and culture. I mean, that was a very dynamic and bold step that missionaries took to keep the culture, but from the heart of the culture, take out whatever was the object of worship and replace it with Jesus, and then taught them and they would work. I saw them work day and night to teach those young Maldivian men and women. And then, by the way, finally they got caught. They were almost killed. They escaped because they were US citizens. They came back to look at their thing. Once they recovered from the trauma, they came to Trivandrum and set up their base.
Yeah,
Because all Maldivians came to Trivandrum for medical this thing. And these were doctors. These guys were doctors. So they would engage them, help them in their but India never gave them the license to practice, by the way. They went up to the president level, but they didn't get approval to practice medicine. But they would help these people to go to the local doctors and things like that. But in the process, they got a lot of people whom they could reach out. What I'm trying to say is that idea of form has to be something that we need to really see whether all of our forms are biblically valid that we have. Are we flexible on our forms? And are our forms culturally viable? So, Brother Najib, that area, what you said about these being forms, worship, community, leadership, they're not forms. They are core elements of the church, can be manifested in different forms and patterns.
Yeah. I didn't mean their forms. I meant that they are the core subjects, so core elements of basically, but how it exhibits, how it gets demonstrated.
Can be forms, is forms, yes.
Is forms. So, therefore, but if somebody, where you're opening up a church and we are planting a church, we would go through these elements, isn't it? Witnessing.
All churches would go through all of those things because those are core elements of the church. But they can manifest in different forms.
Yeah. So, but that means there is a structure. Okay.
So let me take communion, for example. Communion is a core element of our Christian worship. Now, I have seen communion when I go to my Davangere church. The pastor comes with the bread and all of them go kneel, put their mouth open, he puts it into their mouth. You won't believe it. No, I have in the church in the city, for example, let's say Sarjapur, because Whitefield, we eat it like a meal. We eat it like a meal where the bread and the cup are kept. You are free to go there, and many of us come together. We eat from that bread, we drink from that cup, and there is a fellowship kind of a thing that is there. Then we, embrace one another, we express our affection to each other, and we come back. So me, from this context, when though we planted the church, we allowed him to have his own forms in his culture. So his form of giving was, this thing is very, very extremely holy, this element. And the way he gave it and the way the people were receiving it and kneel down and they would hold their mouth. And that's it. So I got really upset. I wanted to thrash that form. So I came back to Pastor Sam, and said, Uncle, it's something crazy happening. I allowed the form to manifest, and this is how the form is coming. He said, can you leave them alone? Let them just do what they're best in their form. Okay. I will not trash it. We allowed it to continue, and it's happening. It's happening. They're experiencing Christ in those forms in their culturally viable way. And whereas I'm, every time I go there, and I allow him always to dispense the communion, though he will say that, you should do your senior pastor. I said, no, we don't have senior, junior and all. I will just be participant. And then I will come, and it be difficult for me to kneel with my current weight. So I will sit on the chair and he would come and give it to me. So I subject myself to that form also, though. And probably if he came to my church, he would find our way of the form abomination. Because for us, everybody is like, in some of our churches.
So the sacredness versus the casualness of this particular form, that's where people probably, because I came up through the Marthoma church, so I always know it's a very, very sacred, I don't know, what do I call it, ritual. But when I came to the NLF church, I found it is still sacred, but it is kind of done differently. For example, dropping the bread by mistake, and keeping the bread in a much more casual manner, etc., etc. All those, I think, myths were kind of broken away. But there is the church follows a very sacred route towards communion, isn't it, Pastor?
So what is the interesting thing is, so when we go away, when the forms, how do we be careful, have to be handled. I saw in many churches, including believing churches, the elements were literally worshipped. But the elements itself are not sacred. What is sacred is our affection for Jesus and Jesus himself. And all these elements are doing is, these are elements that are simple things that we commonly have in our environment. And we are not also believing the Catholic tradition that there's any transubstantiation where anything undergoes any physical change. They are only symbolic. They're only symbolic to what is actually sacred, which is Christ. Participating in his life, participating in the community. So if we are able to understand, now does that mean I'm going to go and now tell my Davangere church all this fantastic theology? And no, I'm not going to do that. In their form, it is, in their culture, it is manifesting. In their culture, it is happening in that way. They are comfortable with it, and they're not theologically wrong. They're not theologically, they're worshiping Jesus. So we allow those manifestations. So what is sacred is what we probably need to see. What is culturally viable. And suppose at any point I see that they are worshipping the elements, I will have to stop it, because that moves from a biblically viable or valid form to something that is not biblically valid. So that's where we would have to intervene and make those changes. I'm just giving examples. So this is just ideas and examples to make this concept of pattern and forms and what is biblically valid, temporally flexible, and culturally viable. Those three elements are so key for us when we plant churches, when we build churches. So inevitably forms will come. That's what I'm trying to say.
Because as a person from a different faith, when I saw people leaving their chappals at the pew and then going and taking the so I said, oh, it's like going to a mosque. We keep our chappals outside and then we enter the mosque. So those pictures keep playing, but in some other churches, they didn't do it. They went regularly with their.
Brother Najib, I'll give you another small example which happened for me. Okay, now we were English churches, mostly English churches that we were planting, but some wild idea came to my mind, and then we felt we should plant a Telugu church. So we started looking out and figuring out ways to reach out to Telugu people, because my area that we are focusing in Bangalore is a predominantly Telugu, not even Kannadiga. So we decided that we should start a Telugu church. I can't speak Telugu for nuts, but I knew that there were people who I could use, and we started the church. We slowly established a community. The community was growing, people were coming and things like that. So I observed that majority of the Telugu people leave the chappals outside. Now, you know what my normal attitude was? I need to thrash that myth. I restricted myself, given Pastor Sam's thing, that let forms be forms. So I spoke to many of my senior aunties there in the thing. Some senior people are there, and they believe that this is a sacred place, and we've expressed that sacredness by not wearing chappals. Then I asked Auntie, have you problem that I'm wearing chappal inside? I'm wearing my shoes inside. She didn't answer me that, but she was okay. She accommodated that idea, that because in the evening, morning of the same day, everybody walked in with chappal actually for worship, because it was an English service. The Kannada service also, some of them left outside, some of them came inside. So you see that manifestation of a form there. I didn't want to bash that form. Now, this one auntie is there. She's after my life for reducing my weight. Okay. Anyway, this auntie came to me one day after the service got over, Telugu service. I preached this fiery message, and she came out there and said, she calls me like son in their thing, and she came to me and said, I think for the they are all affected by the Hebron ministry. I think Sadhu Singh or somebody like that, not Sadhu Singh, I'm not sure who. The entire Buxing, yeah, Buxing's teachings are predominantly affected, and a lot of churches planted there. Okay, and they were heavily into certain theologies, which are not bad, they're good, nice, and they form structures for that. And most of these people, when they come into cities and all, they cannot bend, because they become very rigid in those forms. So one day she came to me and said, son, do you mind if for our benediction that we all stand up? So I said, Auntie, why is it like that? No, we did like that in our churches. So I feel that when we don't stand up, we're not giving respect to Jesus. I thought, okay, what all new ideas are going to come? I don't know. But I was thinking, hey, she was willing to compromise with all our forms. She was willing to accept somebody wearing chappals into the church. What is the problem if I compromise there and that? So I called the elders of the church. I said, is there any problem you will have if we stand up during benediction? No problem, Pastor. Then please. So we adapted to that form of that cultural this thing. But there's no problem there's no theological violation if we stand up during this thing. So it's interesting how these things play out as we play.
But as a new believer, I came to know that it's okay. It's flexible. It is not rigid, because when I went somewhere else, it was different, and when it is here, it's different. So that gave me a
So temporarily flexible. Yes, I like the discussion. It's very nice. Any other thoughts anybody wants to share? Pastor Cynthia, you also became mutated. I'm sorry, not mutated. Meiosis or mitosis has taken place. I can see you too on the screen. And I'm sure you want to say something.
I know I came late, but in relation to what Brother Najib and what you were discussing, when I took the perspectives course here, one of the couple from New Jersey, they went to Varanasi in the 1980s. They were there for many years, and still they go and come back now. So they shared a wonderful story. After 5 years or so, they were, going in rickshaws and all, it's difficult for an American, living like that in those. Anyway, well, they are married, but the local people always, and one day they were having learn more language and all communication. They realized that these people think that they are not married. They are people living together. And he asked, why do you think like that? Because in their culture, there should be a, what is called bindi over here, right? Yeah. So that all the married people used to wear that. If they are not wearing that, that means that the lady is not married. So then, because they are the missionaries and so they did that. They're wearing bindi so that they can identify that culture. So it will be easy for them to share the gospel, breaking a barrier. That's what he said.
And all of us pastors bashed all our fellow new convert Hindus. This is third eye of Shiva. This is unholy. Remove it right now in the name of Jesus. We bind that demon, thrash them out, send them back to their community. Their community ostracize them. Anyway, yep. Yeah, just some thoughts that happened in the past. Yes, any other thoughts? Pastor Jiju, you are also very silent. You also definitely would have something to say. And Jyoti, and Pastor Jyoti also. Jyoti, I can see you somewhere there on the side. Yeah. You don't come into the limelight at all. You always keep your husband in the limelight.
No, she tells me to turn the camera to myself.
Okay.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, I was just thinking about this communion thing. So I saw a lot of houses in various places, especially in Doha. They were doing the communion at home, husband and wife. So I asked them the reason, what is the reason why you're doing this? So it seems someone taught that they get healed when they have the communion. So, and then, so one of the ladies group I was speaking, and they wanted to clarify these doubts, although I was not the expert. So I went in and did my research and understanding. And one thing that struck me was the question that I wanted to ask them is the Lord stable healing you? Is the Lord healing you? So that was the issue. So the problem is they thought whenever someone got sick, they had some pastor or somebody who said immediately you should all sit down as a family and have the communion. So some of the families had a problem. The male in the family he did not know how to do the communion in a glorious way, the way the pastor was doing. So he would fumble through it, and probably the wife would help, and it was a mess. And then they used to have it, and then they used to feel, okay, now we're going to. So I said, this is not antibiotics, this is not medicine. So the whole point was worship. So many times what is happening is these forms, strict forms, they actually take the place of Christ. Technically, they take the place of Christ. So actually, this is in a way, this is one form of taking us away from the core of who we are and what we are. And if you look at across churches, I had a man who came to a church and he left the church because we were all wearing shoes on the pulpit. And culprit was a Pastor Joseph here. I always ask him to take his shoes off going in the pulpit. He puts his shoes on and goes up. So that family left the church. I still have a problem with you, Pastor Joseph. So the thing is, and I said, why do you leave? So he said, no, you guys are putting shoes, you don't respect God. So then he's talking about the bush and Moses and all that. So I said, Lord created the whole earth, Psalms 24:1. So you should never put shoes in your life because you should always be in a place of worship. That's my comment because you asked for it.
Have you noticed Pastor Jiju and me are in uniform?
Jyoti was telling me,
Okay.
if we were ladies, we would have a big problem, but we are men.
So that's good. That's a nice way to look at the idea of forms and patterns. So anybody wants to share about some patterns that you have in your church? What is biblically valid? What is culturally viable? And what is temporally flexible? Tell us, share with us about some patterns of forms that you have in your church currently that you know is not the holy grail I'm talking about. It's not unchangeable, but it's temporally flexible. It's biblically valid and culturally viable. Yes. Pastor John, are you, Pastor Sandeepan, Pastor Varaprasad, are you all available to share some thoughts?
Even the very fact that we have, a very orderly sort of service, like singing songs, we have the worship first. Why do we have the worship first? That is the norm that we follow. We have the songs first, and they call it worship. Then we have the testimony session. Then we have the word coming. Then some people have the communion in between. Everything. We follow a pattern, and ultimately, it's difficult to change all that. We sort of find it difficult even to make anything flexible, because we feel that any change, it'll make people uneasy. So we have
Pastor, the Spirit of God will not come, right?
Yeah, that's right. In Kerala, we have another system called clapping of hands. When the Holy Spirit comes, there's a frenzy clapping that's going on, and in all the Kerala churches, clapping has to be there when the Holy Spirit comes. So no clapping means Holy Spirit is not there. I don't know, something, this is something that is fixed in the mind of people, that you need to clap your hands, and that will make loud noises, not just ordinary clapping. You need to have loud noises into clapping, and that is another thing that, it's become a norm in Kerala. So there are so many things like this. When microphone is another aspect. Microphone. Pastors cannot preach without a microphone. Microphone has become a norm in Kerala. And one thing, start in a church, pastor, first thing is we need to have a microphone. So pulpit is another thing. We can't preach without the pulpit. So pulpit is, we can't avoid pulpit. So we were starting a church in Whitefield. So I told the owner that we don't have microphone. Then you don't have microphone. I said I cannot think the word church without a microphone, because pastors, the repeat drum card is a microphone. They can bash the people with microphone. So if you don't have a microphone, how can you worship the Lord? I said, we don't want microphone. Then he said, I want to come in, attend your church. So he came, and a lot of times, he came to the church to see what is happening. So he's actually a Catholic, but because he was curious, without a microphone, how can a church function? So I told him, come and see. So I told, we don't have, because hardly 5 people or 6 people are sitting there, and you don't need a microphone for that. And but our pastors feel that we need a microphone for every worship. Podium and a microphone is this. And ultimately, we did not have a podium. I just had a table to keep the Bible. And one of our pastors felt that, there's an old podium there. So he brought the podium to the church and said, Pastor, I brought the podium, so we have the podium. So this is the whole thing. We can't think about a church. Last time I went to a church and I sat and gave a sermon. I told him I am out of the box pastor. So please forgive me if I'm sitting down and sharing the sermon. Hardly 10 or 15 people there. I said, I'm going to sit and say the sermon. I said, that's okay, Pastor? I said, that's fine with me. Yeah, please bear with me, and I'm going to sit and say the sermon. So I sat with them, and I spoke from the Bible. So these are the things we can't. You can't imagine a pastor sitting down and I told Jesus sat down and gave discourses in all the places. He never stood and he never preached from a pulpit. He sat down and shared on the dining table. He shared among the. He shared reclining. Many times in the Lord's table had when they were reclining, which means you lean and you lean to a side and then on a cushion, and then you have the Lord's table. Today we have the Lord's table in all pious way, crying and weeping and all that. So there are so many things that that we have our own systems and forms which is difficult to change. So I feel that form should be flexible. Don't stick on to a particular form. Be open to all the variations that people can. And then don't even. I think we should also not stick to one pattern. Rather, most important thing is to worship the Lord rather than clinging on to form. So that's what I want to say.
Pastor Joseph just reminded me of something. There is a form for the anointing to come also. Like in Kerala, the music has a big role to play with anointing. So there was a man of God supposed to be very close to Pastor Joseph. He said, if the music goes, Holy Spirit goes. So one day the electricity went from the current. So he came out and said, if the Holy Spirit goes, it's not my responsibility. Pastor Sumi was there, I was there. We were running, we were calling, and we said, do something. We don't want to lose the Holy Spirit. So get the music in. Second thing I just remember now is all these anointed preachers. I'm not against anointed preachers. Very, very good. So they have this so-called anointed men of God. I've noticed a pattern when they preach, they have to suck in the air. When the anointing comes, it goes like, and then there are some few syllables and sounds, and then you have to speak in tongues intermittently, because that. Otherwise, the problem is people cannot, so you can't have. Recently, a friend of mine who died, 43 years old, a very simple young man. He used to preach. He used to preach so boring. Like he used to be so slow. His voice was not audible. But when many of the people during the funeral spoke, they all said, man's voice was like, you don't feel he was preaching. But the words that he carried were so weighty, So I realized people begin to notice. You don't need to do that, who, and the sounds, and the extracurricular thing. All this taught to me by, our teachers out there, Gamaliels. Not Pastor Joseph. Poor guy, blame.
So somebody said on the chat that isn't it idol worship? Yes. Communion table has become idols. They become idols. Some people without our knowledge have such sacredness or sacrosanct that eventually that would become. But can I show you another thing that we use forms for? As a pastor or a leader who is heading a church, now I'm not a CEO, and imagine I'm a full-timer. I don't have anywhere in my house. My wife is the boss, and I'm not having an office where I can go and boss anybody. And the only place that I have the demonstration of power is in my church. And do you know that pastors love? Please, I know this. I'm going to get hammered for this. We can hold some of these forms extremely holy and exert our power and control over these people. It's a very risky thing. It's a very risky thing that I would use this and make some of these very sacrosanct, something that only which I can do, something that which makes me separate from rest of the congregation, something which makes me holier than the rest of the things. And therefore what I say has to be obeyed. And have you noticed that in some of the churches, when they pick up the table, their hand shivers, and then they say all that heavy into those, physical way of presenting this as something very holy, and then all the congregation is also like, or even, I'm not talking just about the Mahatma Church or other mainline churches. I'm talking about some of the churches, Pentecostal churches, or maybe some of our own churches, where this is so made so sacrosanct. presented the communion as so holy, and that I, as the pastor, only can dispense this. And me having the power to dispense this makes me holier than thou. And therefore, what I say, you should listen. Why? Because at home, my wife is the boss. I don't have another place to exercise my authority because I'm not working in a secular company as a boss. And the only place I can be boss is in the church. So how do I exert power there? By giving power to these forms, making them in some way idols, and you becoming the mediator for that idol, so that I will exert power on the congregation. Just a thought. I'm just leaving it for open to discussion.
Also in NLF Sarjapur, when I went initially, some people left the church because the way we were giving, way we were conducting communion. And so, the pastor's dilemma is also to clarify these myths and settle the congregation that what is sacred is Jesus and his word and not the form. But then because of that, you might find people leaving.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Okay. So those who would leave would not be new believers. Let me assure you.
Yeah, of course. They are.
So for example, when HSR grew up to about 80, 90, close to 100 people, where the communion time was we had this one table kept, and because we thought about the one bread concept theology, that we said one unit, one body, so we kept one bread. And of course, we couldn't get one big bun, so we kept multiple buns. We compromised there anyway. So when people came to take, it was like huge queue. And there was some. So one day I told the elders, would you mind if we kept two tables? So there is bread and cup on the table, of a tree on the table, and another one said cup and cup. So we had one. I had a call because my number is on the website, and our site always ranks when they search for church in Bangalore. A lady called me and said, would you like to come to your church? You are welcome. Please do come. And she came. And she and her sons came, and they just moved newly to town. Children were studying already here. She left her Gulf job and came down to settle here. And after the service got over, and our service was wild. Okay, they were crazy, and we broke all normal forms we had broken that day. And after the service got over, she didn't say anything, and then after the next Sunday onwards, she didn't come. So we was like surprised, and one day I called her back and said, Auntie, you came, you saw, I know that probably you were not happy with some things, because I figured she's from a brethren background. I asked Auntie, what was that offending to you? I always call and find out honest feedback. I just want to know. And she called me, she said to me, everything was okay. I mean, you were way far away from what I would call a church, but this one thing I couldn't accept. I said, what is it, Auntie? So I thought it would have been the way we worshipped, because that day we all hooked hands and turned around and danced. Okay, we did so many radical things that day. I was thinking maybe she was offended because they didn't dance in worship, or my lead guitarist went and all that stuff, and we did all those crazy things. So I thought some of those were offending. And then during the sermon, I did certain crazy things. So I thought all of that would be offense. She said, no. She said, the thing that I found that you all are going away from the scriptures is that the bread was put on two tables. The Lord's body is one. You have violated the fundamental. And therefore, I think you're all going away from the truth. I cannot want my sons to come here. The sons never went to church before. And potentially, the best place the sons would have come was to our church, because they were easily identified with us. But that lady never allowed our children to come, and she never came because we had in form two tables. Just why did we put it? The convenience of the church. In no way we have made anything less sacrosanct, so that people can you believe it? That form really affected us. I respected. I said, Auntie, I totally respect your view. You should find a place where the bread is one, and please, it should not be two buns. It should be one bun, custom made, so that you can all participate from one bread. I suggested to her, and I closed it.
But then that thinking will continue in that society. No, I was just thinking about this as also the people who left, and that we can change their mindset by by telling the truth.
So-
and of course, because some of these things are, over the years they have.
So, Najib brother, when we transition from our normal New Life model of the cup being distributed, the bread being distributed, to actually going to portray the whole idea as a meal and how we can participate, and we also express, the communion means some kind of an expression should be there. So we used to hold, embrace one another and things like that. We gave a theological basis for that, showing that it's biblically valid for several Sundays, so that our people would be comfortable with that idea. The new people who are from other potential transferred to our church and things like that, they would be comfortable with the idea that we are not away from biblical basis. We have a culture, biblical validity for this. So even though after all that I said, I got called by pastor's office, my boss's office, and said, "Fellow, you are moving away." Unfortunately, Pastor Sam came from one of the services. And communion, we all went, took part, and then we came and embraced. And and our guys, some of our younger guys, they don't shake hand or embrace. They do, "Yo, man." And pastor sitting and looking, "What is this? You're during communion." Monday morning, he called me, "Fellow, you come here." And he thrashed me for about. He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Uncle, that is their way of saying hi. Why are we stopping that form? It is their way of saying hi. If you go them and meet them outside in the street, they will say hi to you." So, we shake hands. Some of us do namaste. They do this. Why are we stopping that form as long as they are able to communicate? Uncle said, "Fellow, you are in a network. Your style will destroy all. I already got calls. Somebody attended your church from another church. They went back to their pastor and said, 'We'll do what Pastor George is doing.' And now there's that pastor is under pressure. So, and pastor thrashed me like left, right, and center. I said, 'Pastor, I will abide because we are in a network and you are my leader. You say to me, I will confide with that whole thing.'" What I'm trying to say is how patterns and forms affects people, their faith, their way of looking at it, being part of a network, how there is a need for uniformity. All of those things, play out. So I'm just addressing Najib's thought. It is not, when we look at it, it's not as simple as explaining to someone. For example, that brethren lady, how much of a theological discourse I have, she is not going to, because from her childhood, she followed that. And for her, it is sacrosanct. And what I did was unholy and probably blasphemous. I don't blame her. But I will not, like Paul said, I will not allow my freedom to be. Some of them are secretly coming and watching and misunderstanding the freedom that we have. Paul says that in Galatians. Okay, good, interesting thoughts. Any other thing before we go to the next part of that presentation? So structure in the early church, worship, community, leadership, witness. And then he talks about charismatic leadership, large group and small group gatherings were part of the church pattern. And I think we all have those patterns. We have large group gatherings and small group gatherings. It almost functioned there in the New Testament church also. And are those forms and patterns continue? In fact, to me, they are more than just forms and patterns. They are the expressions of the church. A spirit-led church would express itself in that way. And all of those functions of worship, community, leadership, witness, all of it, I think, are norms and which we should have. Forms can change. Norms remain, but forms can change. And when Ralph Winter talks about this community, we are talking about apostolic community and the local church community. Okay, so Ralph Winter, you will study in a later article that Ralph Winter will show how what started in the New Testament church as the local church and the elders and deacons, and the apostolic community, which were people traveling around from church to church, planting new churches, encouraging the older churches, established churches, establishing the churches. That eventually became a monastic community as it transformed to the Catholic Church. And this monastic community was that group that, went about on missions, and they didn't have responsibilities, family and all. I mean, that's what he shows, how it developed over the centuries, how these two communities developed over centuries. But the norm was that when you say a church, for me, how I look at it is, when you take New Testament church, the norm was or the way it moved out was we had local churches. We have all local churches. Imagine this is Corinth. When Paul wrote to the church at Corinth, he meant a network of churches. And these churches, when we say the church, when we say the Corinth church, it was a network. Okay, each would have elder and a deacon, or elders and deacons. All of them would have elders and deacons. That's what the way they were established, so that there would be local teaching and local disciplines and all of those things. And probably this was the first church that was established, and this church was established by probably, let us say, Antioch. Antioch was the church that sent the missionary. It could be Paul and Barnabas, let us put it like that. Or Barnabas was not there in the second journey, so Paul and Silas and Luke and all of those teams, the apostolic team came and they established this. And they developed local leaders. And then they went to another place and started this. Probably these churches were established by these local churches, whereas the apostolic community went a little far away on the other side of Corinth and established a church. And ultimately, when all these churches were planted, they would have their own one local leader, who at that time they were called pastors. Okay, at that time, pastor was someone who looked after a group of churches. And this apostolic team would have finished establishing this and now moved on to another church in Ephesus and started to plant churches. So the apostolic team was a traveling community, and the local church teams were the ones that reached out locally. Okay, so these two communities, the local, which Ralph Winter gave the name model, which you will read later, plus the apostolic community or the traveling community, which is called Sodal, is, according to me, many people don't agree with this, is equal to church. For us, in our paradigm, we currently look this as a church. But if you see, it is always the church manifested in this, because the church never existed as one distinct church, always existed as a network, and networks needed network leaders or network servants, which are basically the Sodal leaders, and the local churches needed governance, which was the local leader. Which was greater? We can never say that. We can never say which was greater. But the fact that these both function together is what actually Ralph Winter was talking about in his discourse, which you will see much more detail later. Okay, so that's what something about Ralph Winter wanted to share. And then that picture, Suma sister put, there was one aspect she missed out. Sister, can you put that one slide which you put, that image where the church and then all the parachurch ministries? The first picture.
I can share my screen, Buster.
Yeah, please.
This one, no, Buster.
Yeah, can you run the slideshow?
Yeah.
From current slide? So what he is actually demonstrating is, I don't think I can annotate, no? Yeah. What he is actually showing here is, you see, the church, the community of God's people, and when you go to organized churches, the left side is the common way. That means they would go for denominational structures, interdenominational structures, non-denominational structures, and they were giving examples of non-denominational structures, examples of interdenominational structures, and denominational structures, all of them leading to ministry and witness. Have you seen that? But you see the other side, there is witness happening, non-institutional ministry and witness. Most of the, when you looked at the New Testament church, they didn't have the left side at all. They were just each church becoming a witness, a member of a church becoming each church becoming a witness in the local community. Can you see what has happened over the centuries? We created a lot of structure. Eventually, you saw how far the church is from the witnessing community. That's what was actually he was trying to tell there. Are you able to see the picture? And all of us appreciate what that author or the person who built that diagram is brilliant. He shows now what our churches could become over centuries. Many of our mainland churches ended up with all these so much structures that the church, for its witness, had to go through mediums, sending agencies. They were now a part of the church. They were all extra church bodies that they had to engage to actually witness. And the church itself was so isolated from the community that they need to witness. But you see the other side. The church is in the community. The church is in the marketplace, directly witnessing. Are we all able to appreciate that picture? Because I think sister missed that paradigm. That's why I wanted to bring that idea. And that was the crux of what the author is trying to tell. How parachurches are useful, but how they have taken us away from actually engaging. So in your competency, when you are designing the model, you need to bring that idea out of what are forms and what are patterns and how the core elements are more important, and how a church can end up with structures, which is not wrong, but how they could actually take you away from the witnessing, a community that needs witnessing, and how the community directly can be non-institutional, normal, simple, direct church members, reaching out to the community. That was key in that.
So, Pastor, the parachurch structure, I mean, will it necessarily take you away from the church? Is that what?
What we are looking at is the experience of the last 2000 years.
Yeah, but then if you just debate that a bit more, because of the number of denominations that we have created, every space, every place has multiple denomination churches.
Correct.
Isn't it?
Yes.
So, for example, in Sarjapur, there are so many number of churches, and still the need is not felt. So then on top of that, there's a parachurch which comes and fills the needs of the other area, right? So fundamentally, the question is that first layer, which is the interdenominational church planting, even though there was not a need, but there's a competition between who gets that congregation. So that has to be settled first, isn't it?
So let us look at that. Now, Sarjapur has a population, and we have taken the population count. I'm sorry, I can't remember it right now. And if you look at every 60 people needing a church, 60 believers needing a church, we don't still meet those needs. If the numbers are so big, to witness to that itself, we don't have enough churches still in Sarjapur area. Okay. One. Second thing is, whether it is New Life or whether it is AG or any other church, I am excited that churches are being there, and we have no competition at all. What the idea problem here is that if our church is going to engage the community by putting a school, or am I going to engage the community because that school would have its mission board and the board, and that would have its own controls, or I appoint a mission agency to reach out to that community. I don't have direct control. The mission agency has its own governing this thing. We have an MOU, or we depend upon a third-party organization like Campus Crusade or EUSI. But there again, our church people are not going for that. There's somebody else doing this. You see the problem? The church is not in the community witnessing.
No, I want to, Dr. George, I just wanted to, I think the question that he's asking is about, churches competing with one another, or pastors. I don't know if that is what you meant, but that is very much there today, where one church attracts the people of another church congregation, the people who move away from churches, make your service more attractive so that, people come to your church. This usually happens across churches. I think that there is another dimension to this whole thing where a pastor is successful according to the size of the church that he has. That's a very worldly kind of analysis. So this is also plays a big role where in a large place, yes, we are happy to have 80 church, we are happy to have another church in that place. But if that church grows in a much faster way, because probably God has made it that way, or whatever be the case, or maybe I'm lazy, or whatever be the case. So this issue is also very much there, other than the other, other organizations you're talking about. Just wanted to throw light on it. You can't ignore that. Yeah, all pastors love to have all the other churches.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, that issue we don't, I mean, that I say that there are pastors who have competition issues. There are sometimes within our network itself, there is competition issues and things like that. I'm not disagreeing with that. That's part of our carnal nature. That is it. But what I'm talking about in terms of this picture is that, the idea that the author is trying to say is that the church is on the left side is not directly witnessing, but is that witnessing is probably the witness is hired. It is not what the original New Testament church is supposed to do.
But the parachurch is stepping in faster because there is a capacity issue. There's a capacity issue in terms of number of things that the church wants to do. So structurally, the parachurch should work hand in hand with the local church and not start on its own. So is that a possibility or no? Is what
now, because of what has happened over the centuries, and church did not do what it was called to do, parachurches came. But as we saw, they are man-made. Not a church was supernaturally brought in to the picture. This is man-made. Why? Because the church never did its function, so we created. Like if you read Pietism in the early church, we read that article. William Carey went to the Baptist church and begged them, send me out, send me out, send me out. Okay, I'm willing to go to the far-reached places and unreached places, but send me out. They didn't have funds for it. They didn't have a division for it. They didn't want bothered about. They were not bothered about it. So finally, what did he do? He formed the Baptist Society, and that he got funds and he went to India. So I'm not, those issues happened, and we have evidence in history that the church did not rise up to its reason. We looked at the reasons why the church did not do it at that time, post-Reformation. But when our idea is to not go back to the Reformation. Our idea is to go back to what the Lord did in when the church was born, and look at the early church and the evidence that is there in the records to see that the church directly communicated the gospel to a community. That's why Paul says in Romans 15, I have no more, there's no place left. I have finished my work. From Jerusalem to Illyricum, I have covered my area. Did he cover every person from Jerusalem to Illyricum? No, strategic cities. He evangelized strategic cities, established churches and commended them to the Lord, empowered them to lead, and he moved on because he knew that locally that church will take care of the job.
Yeah. So on Sarjapur Road, just to conclude, Pastor, just to conclude that thought, on Sarjapur Road, the entire road, the assets are belonging to Catholics. Catholics have settled there for a long time. I mean, and they have developed those places. They have served the community. They've opened schools, etc. And therefore, they played a very important role in that community. Whether everybody became Christian, no, but they saw a sense of, Bible-believing Christians doing work for the community there.
But brother, let me explain. Let me give you my thoughts on what the Catholic Church did. Today, I'm happy the Catholic Church did it because we get low-cost place to do our programs. Okay, we are excited with what God did through using the Catholic. We're not against the Catholic Church. Okay, but I went to a place where I wanted to hire a place, and they said, "Which church are you from?" I said, "We are from New Life Fellowship." Short of taking a stick and beating us, he did everything else. That you are the fellows taking our people. What I'm trying to say is that as you see it, but are we as a church there? Are we able to engage the community and share the gospel? That's our aim as a church. Whether we employ third-party structures and parachurch structures is what has now happened over centuries in many of the churches. And how that takes a church away from the community is what we are seeing. Where the church people now only come on Sunday morning, attend and go, and they do not take any responsibility because I'm giving money to missions, and the church has appointed a mission agency to do the job. That was not the way church was designed. That's what the picture is trying to say. Pastor Sindhyapan, you unmuted, therefore you are going to speak. So that's your
I'm waiting for too long. Okay, so I think we have to have some clear discussions connected to this topic. Like we've been quite a bit, in my opinion, we are quite a bit diverted in our discussion. See that the thing is, like, if you read the article number 2, that unit 2, okay, what do missionaries do? And the heart of Christian missions, like David Hasselgrave article. Okay, so we would actually understand what is mission, and so the how missions died. That in the dark ages there was no missions. People are not preaching the gospel. People are not establishing churches. Then we saw how after that Reformation movement and slowly people started having a spiritual life. First of all, they were connecting to God. They were the pietism movement and all what we discussed. So they came together to worship God, fellowship together, read the Word of God. His Bible started being printed at that point of time and things like that. So you would see that the church is evolving and it is restoring back to the book of Acts. So where we find that the church was the mission based. Church was the local church, especially the local church was supposed to be central to God's purposes of preaching and discipling people. So then the things came about missions. So missions started getting established. If you could remove the screen, it'll probably help me. At least I can see some of you.
Pastor is a preacher, so he needs the pulpit and the microphone, Pastor.
Stop sharing your screen, Suma.
See, George, I'm not a virtual church pastor like you. You're online pastor.
Yeah, Pastor.
I like to connect to people. At least their faces. Okay, so the missions, the mission organizations were established. That's why you see that there are two in that article which I presented, that Luther's movement. So the Catholic Church because of the fight between the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church. Okay, the Protestant Church still remained. That is Martin Luther and all those people. They still remained. They said no need for missions. There's no need for missions. Whereas Catholic churches went on doing the mission work as establishing schools, starting hospitals, and doing community work. Okay, so that's why in that article he brings a clear balance. The article that David Hasselgrave, that the heart of the Christian mission. He's saying, doing any kind of social work is not the mission. Okay. It is not the mission. It's not what the first century people did. So he says the mission and evangelism. So missionary evangelists and evangelistic missions or whatever. So there are other people who said preaching the gospel, getting people saved by the lifting up of hands, taking some commitment form. Okay. So he is trying to bring about a balance. So the Catholic Church went on establishing the schools and hospitals and things like that, whereas the Protestant churches were totally oblivion to the fact that they should be preaching the gospel, and they said no need of missions. Then the evolving of missions is very clearly brought forth in that unit 2, where it says that you have to have. They had missions. They started missionary societies, Bible colleges, to send missionaries. So we saw the first missionaries who came. There's a very good article that Luther to carry. Okay, so the mission organization started coming and they preached the gospel. They established the churches to the way what they thought, to the level that they had thought, and many of the Protestant missionaries also started schools and hospitals, but they did it little better than the Catholics because of the faith, the doctrinal faith that they had was great. So then the starting of the parachurch organizations. See, parachurch organizations came in much later than the mission organizations. Okay, so where they felt the need, that we need to reach out to students. Okay, reach out to students, because students are different people, they are intellectuals, we need to reach out to them. Like in India, for instance, Evangelical Union of Students, okay, Evangelical Union, USI, or Youth with a Mission. There are so many different organizations came up trying to, these are parachurch organizations, and the parachurch organizations kind of coming into competition with the church. Okay, the same people, like some students are there in USI, they'll be attending some church. Okay, so everybody trying to pull them. Okay, so there are so many, like Campus Crusade. Okay, so these are parachurch organizations. So these organizations also came up over a period of time. Maybe I think this organization should have evolved in the late 20th century. I don't think it's before that. Okay, maybe after the 1950s or so. Many of the organizations, what we have, Campus Crusade, Youth with the Mission, USI, then Bible printing, so Bible Society of India, or Gideons. See, they all came up. These are all parachurch organizations. Okay, so these things have come. So as one beautiful statement was brought out very nicely, that they said that the church is there to glorify God, and the parachurch organizations are there to serve the church. I mean, that statement, Sister Suma had brought it out from the article. Okay, so parachurch organizations are going to, they should be supporting the local churches to fulfill the Great Commission. Okay, so the local churches should be, like, for just give two examples. Only our own Pastor Sam now, like he says, he has a burden for the people, the tribal people in Wayanad. Okay, so in the past, tribal mission, there was a mission organization who were trying to reach exclusively to the tribals. Okay, but the church, as they realize, okay, we are in a better position. Okay, the Pastor Sam picked up some couple. Okay, now they are being handled by Pastor Sundar. Okay, so the mission organizations, okay, who are, just as an example, the mission organizations which are working among the tribals, they were doing it because the church was not doing it. Okay, but God is bringing the church into focus. We are still in the process of restoration. The church is not, many of us in the New Life and maybe some church organizations are maybe more closer to the first century church, but most of the churches are not. Okay, still. Okay, so it's a progressive evolution. So, like in Hubli, there's a particular community called Chikalgars. Chikalgars are actually rag pickers. They come in the morning, they just go to all the dustbins, come near the house, they pick up all this waste. So this is a particular group of people. They speak a specific language. They have, they might. So one particular church here, Assembly of God Church here, this pastor has picked up this group of people, and he's putting in a lot of efforts. He's working with other mission organizations. So the mission organizations, or parachurch organizations, are helping the church. This Chikalgar people are here in Hubli city. Okay, I think there are many other cities also, but here in Hubli city, they are there. So they are, the church, the AG church is working with this different mission organizations to translate the scriptures. They come up with already many songs in the Chikalgar language. So the parachurch organizations, if they work with the church is the central focus of God. Okay, the local church is the focus of God's plans and purposes. So the parachurch organization should serve the church in, or help the church in accomplishing the purpose of the Great Commission. It's not they should be accompanied. It's not that they're not required at all, but more and more, like Gideons are the printing Bibles. The Bible Society is printing Bibles. In a way that we cannot close down these organizations. Every church cannot start printing Bibles. It's a waste. Okay, but they can work very closely with the local churches. Like Canada recently means maybe 5 years back or 6 years back, they came with the first study Bible with small little bit of notes and things like that. So they're coming in helping the church. So the church should be the focus, should be the mission base, and all the parachurch organizations should work together with the church. And God is bringing this about. God is the mastermind in a way, okay, and He orchestrates the different things that are happening in the world to bring about the church being the focus. It's not that we are in competition. We are the Parachurch. So we are working together. So that one statement that was brought out from today's article by Sister Suma, that is, the church is there to glorify God and fulfill the Great Commission. The Parachurch organizations are to serve the church. So if you understand that all things, hospitals are existing, schools are existing. If they are existing and helping the church to reach out to the communities, like we have a school here in Hubli. Just give you an example. There's a school. It is done by some CSA people, Basil Mission people, and those people are not fully believers. That initially, when I came to Hubli, at some point of time, the principal and everybody accepted Christ. So now there's a school that is existing. All kinds of people are in that school. So then, at some point of time, she started calling me to the school. Okay, I used to go to the school because she was working with me. I used to go to the school and share the gospel at different points of time. Because they're all from different backgrounds. They're not Christians per se. So the school is a parachurch organization. Okay, so if they can work together with the church, which is a Bible believing church, evangelical church, I know that there are many people saved because there are people who are teachers who are sharing the gospel with the students, and they're sending the students to some church. See, so this is how the work should be going on. So I think this topic itself is organizations and networks with the local church. I think we should discuss more on this. Yeah, that's it.
Pastor, the article was about form of the church. So we are discussing on what is forms and patterns, how our churches, I agree with what you're saying. You put the whole thing in context. So I totally agree with you. But as a community, we are trying to see what the author is saying in this thing. How many of us have read this article and come today?
Both articles. First article and second article are in the church.
Anybody else who has read and come the article, this form of the church?
No, but I read only the issue 1 article. I didn't read this article.
Okay. So when we read this article, we are able to understand what the author is trying to tell us. The author is trying to tell us that the church tends to form patterns and forms. And we are not against the forms. Now, for example, this form which we are seeing on the left side of this picture, where the church is engaging the community through parachurch organizations or other sub-church, infra-churches. He called it the word infra-church organization. But we are not against it. We are not against it. That's the way it is happening. That's a form that has taken. But if you go back to the early church form, the early church form is what our focus is on. Our focus is the church should engage community directly. That is the paradigm shift that Jeff is helping us to reach. He is not saying all of the others are wrong. He is very much saying that these are things that has happened. We are seeing these patterns. We are seeing these things. These are forms that have come. Are they biblically valid? That's a question that we have to see. One of the forms he talks about is how these parachurches, the churches engaging parachurch organizations to reach out to community. But the pattern or what we see in the first century, the early church, the church community was directly engaging the church. So the church has adapted forms now, the way that is. So that is the whole journey. And in the process of that journey, we are also understanding what are forms, because for us we have to understand the whole idea of what is patterns and forms. Honestly, before I did the course, I also didn't see the concept of patterns and forms. What is normative? What is forms? What do we look at? What is function and what is forms? And he's bringing that out. And for us as church pastors and all, it's a good exercise to kind of see of what is this thing and what would be pattern. Patterns and forms are not wrong. They have, as long as they are biblical. He has given a criteria for us also to engage it. Yes, Pastor, you want to say something?
Yeah. See what has happened. See, this is not exactly about form and function, because the form and function we almost discussed in the first 2 sessions. Okay, And again, we have gone back to the same discussion on communion table and worship.
No, Pastor,
So, allow me to complete.
that is there in the article.
One
That is
minute,
there in the article.
Yeah, just a minute. Allow me to complete. Okay, you want me to give me a perspective? Allow me to complete. Okay. See, this particular article or this particular unit itself, okay, as I understand, has got a different focus. Okay. The functions, okay, are very clearly, spelled out there. Okay. That is worship, witnessing, leadership, and all those kind of things. See, this article is a very, very rich article. Okay. So we should be discussing this article in a very, very nice article. And she also has brought very, very well presented. She has presented very beautifully. Okay. So if you read the contents and come, then we'll be focusing on discussing this particular point. Okay. So we are gone back discussing about whether we should wear shoes in the worship service or we should be using mics and sorry to say, but that's not the point of discussion of this article. Okay. This article has got a specific purpose. Okay. So this article, I hope that Suma will send this presentation to us to make life easier. Okay. She has really beautifully, she has brought it out. Okay. If you really go through this and discuss this, okay, that is what we should do. Okay. So here he is talking about small groups, big groups, small groups and big groups. Then he is talking about ministry. There are different kinds of ministries that are being done based on the giftings. Okay, these are the things that we are supposed to be discussing. Okay, so I think we should kind of lead the discussion in that direction. Okay, and we should focus. It will help us. That's all.
Pastor, for example, when you explain the idea of what is temporally flexible. Now, many of us sitting here, we may not be able to understand what is temporally flexible. Sister Suma missed that out. So our idea was to talk about what is temporally flexible. So everybody does not understand the article equally. So our idea is that everybody is very thorough with the article, so they can write the competency. You put it in the overall context, which is very good. And that's why I think your contribution is significant here in this community discussion. But we also have to see that all of us come to the point of understanding words like temporary, flexible. Some of us may not understand what is forms and patterns even now at this point, because we may not have read the first article. You understood? So who have read the first article of Gene Getz and all understands what is form and function and all. Some of us will never get that also. Some of us read it, never understood, but we have come again. He brings it again. Jeffrey will keep bringing the topic again and again. Now, ultimately, what is he trying to focus? He is trying to focus on the idea of how the church started to network with other organizations. It became a form. It became a form. That is not what the original church was meant to do. That was his idea. The idea is that form biblically valid? Is it temporally flexible? Is it culturally viable? So when we are discussing each of these topics, we have to take examples for us to figure out the concept of what is a form and pattern, because it's very difficult for us to. Now, for example, Brother Najib was bringing out some of those ideas. So all of us are contributing to discuss into the community the aspects of this article. And of course, we need to set it against the bigger side of it. The thing. So now coming to the ultimate part of this, which is that comparison chart, the chart that was the church and parachurch, that chart which compared, I think is very critical for us to see that. And what do we share it? Yeah, Pastor, sister, you can share it. It's good. I think this is one of the biggest takeaways of our this particular article in understanding the whole idea of networking, organizations, and parachurch. When we look at our unit in the beginning, the topic in unit number 4 is authority of the parachurch organization. Okay, and we haven't read that article yet, but in this article, this whole issue still comes. Relationship of local church to parachurch organization is the issue 2. And today, when we look at this chart, I think it takes away, it brings the actual place, because many of us are born again through parachurch organizations. I know people who left the church because they couldn't agree to what we are trying to say of reclaiming the original New Testament early church paradigm. What are we doing by, we are not saying, we are no more saying Parachurch is, the existence of Parachurch, we have to take into cognizance because it is there. But are we able to come to a place and say that this chart, what we are seeing, makes sense? And are we in agreement with this chart? Yes. Pastor Jiju says yes. So, how many of us can say yes, that we are reclaiming the original paradigm, early church paradigm, when we come back to the idea of the church, and that the Parachurch is a man-made organization?
Sure, surely correct.
All of us? I mean, any of us?
I think yes.
Pastor Joseph, what do you say? Yes. Subhash, you can unmute and share your thoughts. You may not agree to that. You don't agree to the, that's good. I like that. Okay. That's where the fun begins, actually. Okay. So help us to see your perspective.
Yeah, because being in the church, and especially established churches, and I think it's a maybe common for any churches, anything those who are established over the years, becoming more and more closed. And of course, they may have more people and things to do, and the focus became shifted to the actual mission rather to serving the local community, which is essential. You cannot ignore, and the spiritual growth is important, absolutely. But I see, many churches, including the church I came out of, all those things becoming, even to explain the Great Commission or the things to reach out, is not even touching any, only one or two people from the maybe out of 700 or 1,000 people have this vision. And they may be struggling in the church for a long time and can't do anything. So these are the many instances that happen like that, and not because just only frustration. Many people even prayed about it, sat together and came together, those like-minded people. And I have seen the God is working through that, because that's the way God works.
Pastor
Subhash,
what we are trying to say is not your current scenario. Current scenario is what it is today. That's why he drew that picture, that that picture that the Snyder gave us. That's a current scenario. But what are we trying to do? We are trying to reclaim the original early church paradigm.
Yeah, that I agree. Yes, church failed. Where the church failed, that because of that, all these things happen.
No. Subhash, the paradigm that we are trying to reclaim is that the church is the original.
Yeah, correct.
So
yes.
we are looking at the contemporary situation, current situation. That's why that picture has come. So when sister, can you go to that picture again? Just can you back it up to that picture? Yeah. So in this picture, we have on the left side a paradigm, which is the contemporary paradigm. Okay. You have reasons for it. The church failed or whatever the thing is. But when you want to, as an effort of this course and the effort of Antioch School is to take us to the early church paradigm, reclaiming the old paradigm. so that we now freshly see what God wants us to do. Okay. What do you think? Sister, can you move it one slide forward? What do you think of this chart in terms of the paradigm change that we are trying to go through of reclaiming the early church paradigm and now bringing that early church paradigm and working into our context? I hope everybody is able to see what he is trying to do there.
Not able to get it, Pastor, because you know the whole thing about failure of church versus capacity of the church. It's always said, right? The harvest is plenty, but the laborers are few. The church is not able to send as many as the requirement is, and there's a capacity issue. So if Campus Crusade came forward, or if say Urban India Ministries came forward for family ministry to help the church, it is I don't know whether you should call it a man's creation, but it has got a biblical, you know, baseline to that, which is to address a particular.
Good thought. But let me come and take you there on that statement you made, that the church is not able to reach out, right?
Yeah, capacity.
So in that issue, we go back to the early paradigm.
Yeah.
Did they come up with parachurch structures to reach out to the world?
No, they didn't, because they were starting from zero, no?
Correct. But as they were growing, did they create leader of leaders and disciples so that it supported the gospel enterprise of church planting and movement? So what are we trying to do here is to look at that paradigm and say that where are we lacking as a church today? Where are we taking a screenshot of what has happened today? And in this particular unit, we are looking at parachurch organization as one of the subjects, wherein which we are not against it. I mean, as Pastor Sindhyapan also said, you know, there were opportunities that we did use parachurch organization. Okay. So today, as a contemporary church, we need to look and see where we place these organizations. Okay. Where and how we use these organizations. That's what your part of your competency will be. Okay. And part of our discussions will be on those issues. And this is now a form of the church. This is a pattern of the church that we have today in our contemporary form. How do we reclaim the original paradigm? So what is the paradigm shift where we go looking here? We are taking what we are seeing now in comparison to what has happened originally, the original paradigm. And we are trying to figure out where are we standing and how we can start working in the original paradigm while working with what are contemporary structures that have been created by the church over the last 2000 years. That's a paradigm we are trying to do. So when we look at the original paradigm and we see that the church was the primary function, mediator of the gospel, carrier of the gospel, and all of it worked, as even Pastor Sindhyapan was recollecting to us, that when we read in the unit 2, that the church is itself the missionary. Church himself is the missionary. And the church herself is the missionary, and she is sending out missionaries with an intention of planting churches, and that was the missionary movement. So that's the original paradigm. Now we are looking at what are contemporary situations and now trying to reclaim the original paradigm into what. So in that context, that first picture we have, and this chart is critical in evaluating. Now, Najib brother brought on an issue of we don't have the capacity. So we need to relook as a church. Hey, why don't we have the capacity compared to what the early church actually did? So we need to relook at the whole picture and see how we can reestablish our church in such a way that we can develop capacity. So maybe there is some functions of the church we are not, for example, we may not be developing leaders. We are not giving space for new leaders to develop and establish and things like that. We are not intentionally working in discipleship. We are just happy to bring people to church and increase our number, and probably very happy with that. On a Sunday morning, we have good numbers. Somebody said that numbers itself is not an issue, Pastor Juju was saying. So when we are discussing, we should discuss in the context of the article that we are reading in reference to the unit title, which is there, where we are seeing he is now Jeff is trying to get us to a place to see, using a good author, where we are standing contemporary and how we need to look at it. So he explained to us what is forms and what is functions, and how the church takes on forms. How do we consider how do we consider a form in the contemporary situation of a church? How do we validate a form? How do we validate a form? All of those things he taught. And then he brings the picture of parachurch organization, which is a form that we have right now. Okay, so when he says the church is God's creation and parachurch is man's creation, do we agree with that?
Yeah, one way we can agree.
Yes, I agree
Just
that
as
it's man's creation. Yeah.
Pastor Subhash said, it can also be through a leading of the Spirit of God to start something,
Okay.
which may not be totally wrong.
Okay. What about, it's a spiritual fact, one is a sociological fact?
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay. I think some of you
Because
were...
actually, I had a interview with one of a parachurch organization recently, because we had our our unit
Yeah.
wanted us to have a discussion with the parachurch organization. I had a discussion with one of those parachurch organization, and he is so convinced beyond any doubt that he is doing the will of God. So because he said, I was not that he doesn't believe in church. He is part of a church, born again church. He's bringing his entire family to the born again church. But he says, I am so much convinced that what church cannot do, I am doing. So what I asked, what is it that church cannot do? So he said, see that he is working on leprosy patients. These leprosy patients who have been disfigured and who are maybe outcasts of the society, maybe some of them having still wounds in their body. They're healed, but still having wounds in the body and disfigured faces and all those things. They will not be accepted in a church. So then we have to have something for them, maybe a church established for them, that they can be part of they have a sense of belongingness. So then he said, this is what actually I am doing. So when I asked him, brother, do you feel that the church that we are all part of cannot do this? He said that church was not doing it, maybe. That is why he started doing it. So then I was thinking about how these people are actually getting funds and all those things. I understood that as long as the visionary is there, this will move forward. Once the visionary goes away, this will crumble down. Once the funding society stops funding that organization, again it's got a chance of crumbling down. So it is not a sustainable organization or a thing that is going to last forever. It's only a temporary thing. So whatever now when you read the entire thing, yes, it makes sense, because this parachurch organization, it may not last long like a church, because church is something that has been established by God, and that will move forward. Whatever happens, nobody can stop the church moving forward. But a parachurch organization finally may crumble down with the vision going away, or the main missionary maybe going away from the scene. It can cause a crumbling down, and that entire structure, whatever they have been built over years, may just vanish within a period of time.
Pastor John, I got a point there. Very good point. I mean, thank you for sharing that. What if that parachurch missionary went and planted a church in that leper community?
Yeah, he's planted a church in that leper community.
So what
But
was
that
that?
again, I understood actually. I asked him, who is going to take this church forward? I asked him. So then he had no answer for that.
Exactly.
I said, is there evangelism taking place, or is it actually, in fact, is there a movement that is happening in this church? He said, no, this is only for the convenience of the people.
So let us take that.
I said, that is actually something that I never saw. I just saw the church initially, but I said, this is not going to last forever, sir, brother. So he did not have any answer for that.
So, Pastor, let's use that. I mean, that's a good example. Can we apply our paradigm into that, or the early church paradigm? What that brother could do, your brother could do was he went as a parachurch organization there, but he was part of a church. He
He
went
is
to
now
his,
even now a part of the church.
no. So he goes to his pastor there and
Yeah.
tells pastor that I have access to this community and
Ah.
there is a need there. And
Yeah.
pastor prays and helps him, supports him, and he goes there and he establishes a church, develops local leaders,
Ah.
and does exactly what Paul Esselgrave suggested. Engage a
Exactly.
community, communicate the gospel. So are we able to see that the church paradigm works better than the parachurch paradigm?
Exactly.
So if he establishes the church there, and the church then continues to take the vision of reaching out to the leper community, I think it does a job. It will continue
I
as
wrote this
long
in my unit 2 actually when you told me about this to change the whole thing. I actually thought about all these things and actually added all these things in my unit 2 competency.
Okay, so can you all of you see what we are talking about? I mean, in actually seeing what a parachurch can do and what a church can do. It's a good example. I mean, Pastor John's that was a fantastic example.
Because initially when we see from the outside scenario, everything is looking very rosy and good. But as we start thinking what exactly is the vision, how is this vision going to move forward, and then how this is actually going to be a movement, there is no clear-cut answers for all those things.
Now, let me take example Subhash's situation and our New York church situation, what we are trying to do. So when I first met Subhash and I understood that he was a missionary to working with the ISI and working in this, Pastor Subhash, did I ever come and tell you what you're doing is hopeless and this is, it is not a, we never said that. What did I try to do? If you saw what I strategically tried to do. One, I use that platform to see if we can bring people to our church. One. Second thing, what we talked about, another idea which I had shared with Pastor Subhash is, can we start a church in that university campus? Pastor Subhash, are you able to identify with what I said?
Yeah. Yes.
Pastor, I can actually now
I'm losing you, Pastor John.
identify with you, Pastor, because this particular man who has actually got a work among the lepers, which he's been working there with 20 years. I am now thinking about actually putting our person in the midst of these people to establish a church there.
So my suggestion was to Pastor Subhash, one, you continue in that ministry, but let's get the people to our church. Or of course, he has also associated with other churches that the children go, the university students go to some of these churches, and definitely we can have people come to our church. One. Second thing I suggested is, brother, some of our brothers are studying in this, who are attending our church, couples are studying or associated with these universities. Can we start with one of our couples, a church there? Why? Now, suppose I establish a church in FDU. Okay. We established a church, New Life Church in FDU. That's the name is immaterial. It is just about overseeing with church there. And one of our brothers who is associated with the university is continuing that work there. What happens is he now becomes the leader. He has all the community of this current generation students studying there will become leaders there and disciple there. When tomorrow he moves out, that next senior most person there would become the pastor, and he would pastor that church as long as he's in this thing. And then when he moves out, the next leader would come, and it would continue to be a church, a light in that community, because we follow the principles of what the church was, reclaiming the original paradigm of establishing leaders and elders over a church, teaching the church, discipling the church, helping the church to manifest the gospel and its power into that community. Like we are seeing in Pastor John's paradigm of, now Pastor John is saying, hey, there's no church there, and this is going to die out the moment. Let's put a church there. You see how that paradigm is now working. We are reclaiming the original paradigm. So this current form that we have, in terms of what we saw the left side of the picture, is okay. Is okay, maybe doing the work. But I think it would be more efficient if we reclaim the original paradigm and we went on to plant a church in any of these communities.
And one more thing, Dr. George, I really actually, in fact, we had gone to visit all those places where he is doing work. One thing I've noticed actually, that socially work is going on. They are doing a lot of social work. But if you ask really there's a transformation in the life of the people? No, because all of these people, they use drugs, they smoke, they do everything. I said, then what is actually, what are we doing then? Then there is a time actually I thought about actually a church. A church is going to change those people, and a transformed community will be formed. And that transformed community is going to attract others to join this community. And that is what church is all about.
Okay, cross-culturally valid, culturally bound. Can you? And I think Suma sister had a problem with this, right? Now, what's that? A church can be there in a leper community. Tomorrow, it can be put in a tuberculosis community. It can be put in an urban community. A church will function. Principles of the church is the same. But if you look at a leper ministry, parachurch ministry will only work in a leper parachurch ministry. It is culturally bound by that culture. We are, because that organization is focused only on lepers. It's a social community with a common social problems. They may not adapt. If you tell them, hey, there is a tuberculosis community, they may not be interested and they're not bothered about it, because they say we only know about how to deal with leper community. Are you able to see that issue? But a church would function in anything. Like Pastor John said now, hey, I think I can put a church there. But Pastor John is a pastor to an urban community. But the concept of church is common for him. He has reclaimed the original paradigm and he says, I can put a church there for you and I can function all of those things. I can develop local leaders there. Yes. Yeah. So we can, are you able to, this next is biblically understood and evaluated, socially understood and evaluated. So anything that we evaluate, suppose now Pastor John went and evaluated that ministry, he biblically understood it and biblically evaluated it, it comes short. But if you apply it sociologically, it's good there at addressing the needs of the. So parachurch will say, oh, function is good, send them money, he's doing a good job, he's meeting the need of that community. But Pastor John went and evaluated and said, no, I don't think their lives are being transformed. I think there needs to be some work to be done. Can you see how that is working? Suma sister, are you able to see that? Suma sister, are you able to see the idea of biblically understood? Yeah.
Yes.
Validity determined by spiritual qualities and fidelity to scriptures. Validity determined by function related mission of the church. Can you see that the idea of validity determined by spiritual? Pastor John evaluated it on a biblical paradigm. Other one evaluated on what a church thought. Actually, probably a church that is funding that mission agency. Are you able to see the two paradigms? It is not biblically interpreted. It is based on what that church, funding church, thought that they need to support this. Okay. The next thing, God's agent of evangelism and reconciliation, man's agent for evangelism and service. We can clearly see the church sent this mission agency to do the job, whereas the church is the mission agency in the other. Essential and expendable. We know that the church is essential. That doesn't change at all. Tomorrow, if all the lepers are healed, would we need this mission? We don't. But if the church was there in that community, will that church continue?
Absolutely.
Exactly. Divine revelation. Church was by divine revelation. Parachurch was a human revelation. Tradition. I mean, we developed it because the church couldn't meet this thing. Okay. Purpose is to glorify God. And that's what truly a community should exist. Purpose to serve the church. So we are seeing in this paradigm that if we are reclaiming the original paradigm, then I would say parachurch is the parachurch is to serve the church. We are in agreement with that, and no way control the church, should come under the guidance of a church. And even when we are engaging, for example, what do you think are possible parachurch organizations that we can use as a church? That's what I think we should really look at. What do you think? Suma sister, can you just take off this? We'll close after this, okay? What do you think are common parachurch organizational this thing that we can use? Because you need to probably write this in your competency. What do you think are common? I'm going to share and then you can all tell me, and we need to, what do you think is parachurches organizations that we can really use today? And some of the parachurch organizations we don't need today.
Parachurch organization can be used as a bridge for a church to go and actually touch the lives of people.
Okay, but I think the church can do that directly also.
Yes, but it is actually a bridge that connects to the community.
So, Pastor, that's what I'm saying. If the church can do it, we don't need it technically. But the
Yeah,
church
church
would.
can do it.
Yeah.
I said already existing parachurch organization. Now, if now I am planning to start a church in the midst of these people, I already have now a bridge where the people, there'll be no opposition at all. I can go and these people will help me to get connected with the people. So it's a bridge. That's all.
So
I
this is
don't
how
actually
you.
say that I don't support a parachurch organization, but I
Yeah.
support that using this parachurch, definitely I can use it as a bridge.
So you are looking at it at a very strategic point of view, where you are saying it is an unaccessed community, and because this
Exactly.
church has, yes, we can use this. But once we cross the bridge, what do we need to do?
We need to actually establish a strong church that will definitely take care of by itself, and then it should move forward, planting or maybe expanding and doing what the church is supposed to do.
Super. Okay. Second, can you tell me another parachurch that you really need, the church really needs?
No,
Subhash brother, can you tell me?
no. If the church is doing its part.
Oh, there is.
effectively.
I am telling you, there are some things that we can do. That is what I'm trying to say. There are some areas, because of certain things, we have still opportunities for places. We want to call them parachurch or other names we can call. But I want us to see that there are the paradigm where we can leverage other organizations.
I think hospitals and schools are one.
Hospitals and schools. Okay. We are not interested as a church to plant hospitals and schools. Okay. Do we need that? We don't need it for the gospel. But if they are doing it good, our as a community, we get some benefits. Okay. What do we need as universities? Okay, we are not interested because Jesus never said start universities. We are not interested in this. But if somebody is doing it good, but do you know these may not be actually what we need it for as a church? Let me ask you something. Translation. If I were to say now we are reaching a community, and Subhash brother is reaching out to one community, and he that needs a particular Bible, they speak a particular, like we talked about Divehi. Does the church that is reaching out to the Maldivian community have the capacity to translate it to Divehi? No. So we will appoint a Bible translation agency that does the job. So our church is using a parachurch organization that is slave to the vision of the church. Slave to the vision of the church. They have a specific function of translating the Bible. I think that's somebody we need. There's another one. Though we call it universities, I would call it as seminaries. Do we need seminaries? Oh, yes, we need seminaries where we can get research data. Without this, we will never know what is Hebrew, what is Greek of this word, we will not know. So we need seminaries. 4, do you think anything else? Anybody? Come on, think. Let's think and really work on it.
I just feel, Pastor, all this is highly debatable. If you see in churches, just taking the way we live, the amount of, as couples, where people work, and the kind of issues that couples have in working communities, I don't think every church is able to cater to all their needs. And that is where church organizations of, couple counseling and counselors.
Okay. So
and
let
all
me,
this,
certain specializations.
yeah.
Okay. So we have, let's say UIM, for example. UIM is focused on marriage research. They're doing research in marriage, can you see that it comes under seminaries? It's an institution. Okay, my wife just graduated from this, so I'm saying, so you have specializations, but all of these comes under seminaries. We need it. They're doing research exclusively. There are people doing research in counseling, but they are also, like, for example, PTP. Do we need them? Yes, they're doing research in that. We can call them, or now our US church is engaging Compass. They are research organization. They've worked in finances, but these are all seminaries. They don't come into any form of church planting, what the church is supposed to do. They are specialized in certain area, and they come by the side of the church and help the church in equipping some of these very specialized areas. Are we able to see this? So does the counselor PTP organization teach the church to evangelize? No. Does the Bible have a basis of counseling? Oh, yes, it is. Now, whenever I have in my church a need for a marriage counseling, I'm not calling it to PTP. Are you able to see this? I'm not referring the marriage counseling to PTP. I have a trained pastoral couple who is probably trained by the church and the local pastor, who is able to deal with the marriage need. Suma sister, are you able to see it?
Yeah.
So are you able to see how that paradigm works?
So that doesn't mean that we cannot have these organizations too. The church enables, but that's it. So both have to work together is what I feel. A parachurch, and of course, as what is said, it is a service to the church.
So sister, what we are trying to do is, you are capturing the current paradigm, right? You are seeing
Yes.
the church and parachurch organizations are there.
Yes.
Current paradigm. What this course is making us to do is capture the early church paradigm.
I believe they didn't have these issues, Pastor.
No,
sister,
sister, that's what I'm trying to say. When we say that they didn't have issues, they had issues at that time, different issues. For example, slavery was there. You understand what I'm saying? They also had issues, but the church, for what it was purposed, it was doing its function. We are bringing it, we are learning those principles and bringing it to the current paradigm. How then now we look at the parachurch? So we are saying they can serve the church. And we are saying now choosing, okay, what are the parachurch services that we can use, which we cannot do as a church?
Right.
So I know that when I was planting a church, I knew that counseling was required. I was not a trained counselor. So I approached one of these organizations that is gospel-based, that has a church roots. I went to them, I told them, can you teach us? So can you teach us leaders? Then they came as a team and they biblically taught us how to counsel people. But when I have a person or a couple in the church that does not have, that needs marriage counseling, I'm not referring them to PTP. My function as a church is that we should be able to counsel them within our churches. Now,
Exactly.
if there is requirement for confidentiality because you don't want to talk to somebody in center, then there are other church counselors available in other networks here and locally, but are church based, who are trained. So you see the way I am using the church, the parachurch organization. I am not discrediting parachurch organization, but I am reclaiming my original paradigm of the early church, and how now using that paradigm, how I will facilitate the support of parachurch. That's what we are trying to do. Why do we learn forms and patterns? We are looking at how these things came about to be, how patterns came, how certain forms came in the church. And we are because we need to see that what Snyder was trying to do is, Snyder was trying to create this picture for us, taking a screenshot and telling us, hey, how this is how our paradigm is, and this is the early church paradigm. How can we bring the early church paradigm here? Okay. Fantastic. You can probably increase this translation research. There are other areas also that we can use specialized like bridge. Pastor talked about creating bridges. Once we cross the bridge, we don't need the bridge anymore, right?
Pastor, I have a question. The basic fundamental issue is, isn't it now including the church and including the individual and even families, is it become more individualistic rather than a community-based and unity? Isn't it because of that everything is falling apart?
Correct. So again, we have an entire course that is focused on this within the Antioch network, curriculum, where we take a church, because today's philosophy is individualistic. This is the secular philosophy of the world. It's my life. Have you heard that? It's my life. But the Bible is always addressing community. Why? Because God is community. He is Trinity. And from there, the whole paradigm comes. So yes, we have to deal with this because it is only addressing this paradigm. Is this paradigm there? Yes. In this community, there are individuals. So the individual paradigm is there, but it is always held in tension. This is always held in tension. So we need to see how we need to look at it, because the community paradigm should come first, because God is community. And in that context of community, individual paradigms is addressed. And we struggle in church primarily because the world is putting pressure on the individual paradigm, and the individual paradigm is constantly surfacing above the community paradigm. That's why we have conflict in church. When Jesus said, consider the other one better than you, he was trying to bring in the individual paradigm under the community paradigm. Are you able to see it? Okay. Right, I hope so. Okay, I think we did a very extensive look at that particular article. I think that is very key when you're going to write the article, because the other articles are crazy articles, may not make any sense to you. That's why I really spent time on this. And Najib brother will do the next one, and with the previous one, that is, I think those are the two articles that are easy for you to understand who really sends a missionary and the form of Snyder. Repositioning and the mission agency are both very difficult to understand and very complex articles. But these two articles should give you enough substance to write your competency. You understood why I dwelt so much on this article today? And I think we all are going through paradigm transformation pressure.
Yes.
So are you able to understand the philosophy of the course, reclaiming the original paradigm? Then with that paradigm, we are trying to address the issues of our current paradigm. We're not trashing anything. We're not trashing anything, but we know how to use the current scenarios, how to best order our scenarios. All right, good. We did 3 hours. Congratulations. We did it.
Pastor.
Yes. Pastor Vanaprasad actually finally spoke. Okay, good.
Pastor, as a church, please pray for my son. He's in the hospital.
Yes. How is the situation, Pastor?
He is getting better, Pastor.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, Uncle.
Hi. You're doing well?
Yeah, Uncle.
Oh, wonderful.
Operated on the 3rd, Pastor.
Okay.
The legs are fine. They told to discharge today. We are in Manipal, Udupi.
Okay.
I'm staying in Pastor Gopi's place.
Okay.
His and mummy is staying in hospital.
Okay.
We need your prayers so that.
Pastor, can we pray? Can we pray for him right now?
Yes, Pastor. Please pray.
Yeah. Shall we all pray, pastors? For can you give me his name, Pastor?
Yes, Pastor.
Can you give me your son's name?
Austin.
Shall we pray? Father, we thank you so much that we as your church here come in the authority that you have given us. Lord, we commit Austin into your hands and we pray for your healing upon him. Thank you for the wonderful way that you led him through the surgery, and we pray for speedy supernatural healing to happen in his body, Lord God. And Lord, even through this experience, that you would draw him closer to you. I pray for Pastor and his wife and the supporting church, that is community that is supporting me. Thank you for that community that is supporting them, and thank you for Pastor and his wife. And Lord, fill them with hope and joy, and even through these tribulations and difficulties, Lord, I pray that your joy would continue to rule their heart. We thank you so much. We pray and declare healing upon Austin's body. We thank you, Lord Jesus, for the opportunity to pray for your this young soul. We pray this in Jesus' precious name.
Amen.
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 Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Pastor.
everyone.
Pastor,
Gilbert,
I want to appreciate your commitment that you were there and listening to the whole day through this
Thank you.
situation.
Yeah, but I don't want to miss the teachings, Pastor.
Okay.
And my wife is here.
Hi, Pastor.
Hello, sister. Nice to see you. Okay.
Please continually pray for us, pastors.
Yes.